281. Game Test. Soon the second closed beta of the game was released. There were still plenty of rough edges, but the progress was huge. At least the basic framework was finally there, vastly better than the last monstrosity. Now it was a matter of patching holes, fixing bugs, polishing details, and optimizing the various systems. For the second closed beta, the Weasley twins brought in their good roommate and best friend, Lee Jordan, to test the story mode they'd built. The story mode recreated the classic battles the Gryffindors went through in the books. The twins had even gone so far as to set the playable characters' ages to match those in the stories. 10 years old. Lee put on the magic game glasses and was fully immersed. As a 10-year-old chased by two redcaps, he got stabbed 8 times. He screamed with the headset on, crawled more than 20 meters across the floor, and the twins, plus Ron and Jerry, couldn't hold him down. It was blatant, full immersion. Lee would be terrified of redcaps for years afterward. Still, the twins felt it was not quite real enough. Compared to the book's brutality, even the magic glasses felt a bit softened. In tense moments, players missed the small, crucial details. The twins wanted to push realism further. Pain had to feel real. It didn't need to reach the level of being stomped into mud by a land dragon, but at least 50% of that intensity, right? Otherwise, how could they claim everyone would learn anything of value from Gryffindor's training? There was another surprise for Ted in this beta. He actually got experience from the game. Not in the same way as fighting monsters in the books, but while little wizards played, he gained a steady trickle of experience. It wasn't huge, but it was reliable. If he kept developing and refining the game, that income might grow. If the game ever caught on, the experience generated by players every day could push him toward level 20 by the time he was 20. That possibility lit a spark in Ted's enthusiasm. As with all things at Hogwarts, news spread fast. Once one second year knew, everyone knew within hours. 16 students were directly involved in development, more than a dozen indirectly, and about 20 more had been specially invited to the second beta. Rumors ballooned into legend. Ted and his crew are building something that'll go down in the history of magic, some whispered. By lunchtime, 12 iterative versions were already floating around. Of course, Slytherins, none of whom had been invited, called it dangerous witchcraft and said the creators deserved Azkaban. Jealousy made their version louder. With the fuss the game caused, Professor McGonagall quickly took notice. Ted was summoned to her office. The fire in McGonagall's hearth crackled cheerfully. She wore a pair of rimless spectacles, crystal glasses actually, the very ones Ted had fashioned and gifted her. "Child, why did you spend that on me?" she asked. "I made them myself, Professor. They didn't cost much. Consider it a token of my regard." McGonagall's expression softened. "All right, don't do it again." She set down her quill, pushed up her glasses, and regarded him with a different tone, part disappointment, part concern. "I thought you had become steady and responsible," she said. When Ted had completed his Shadow Crow transformation, she'd assumed he'd finished his animagus studies and had been delighted. She'd let up on watching his extracurricular activities. She hadn't expected him to build a magic game and assemble 20 or 30 students into a development team that had become the talk of the school. Neglecting homework was one thing, but parading it so openly was another. Dumbledore had been urging professors to teach more practical skills to increase students' combat readiness. Did Ted not understand what that meant? The school needed discipline and example. As an outstanding student, he should set one. Ted scrambled to explain. "Professor, I worried the students might get addicted. That's why I made the game educational, edutainment." He presented his Little Wizard Game re-education plan. He explained the Weasley twins' idea, hardcore combat in the story mode so young wizards could feel the cruelty and chaos of real fights and gain combat experience without panicking in unexpected situations. Hermione's magic card mode would require players to know spells to use or craft cards, a threshold of knowledge. To create a card, a player would need proficiency in that spell and an understanding of magic runes. Care of magical creatures content would require real knowledge of the subject. Even in battle modes, wand control would affect control responsiveness, the rough equivalent of a ping. Poor wand control would feel laggy. In short, to master the game, you'd have to study. McGonagall listened, thoughtfully pursing her lips. It wasn't entirely novel. She'd seen edutainment before. When she'd been a student, some professors used games like magical 10-pin bowling to train wand control. Hagrid's Care of Magical Creatures classes, too, taught through hands-on care. Ted's model made sense. The right kind of entertainment could be instructive. She sighed and said, "All right, keep the noise down. I'll review it when it's further along. Go rest." Ted left with the review already promised even before his game was finished. The third closed beta began. Besides the development team, 36 trial players were invited. Much more content had been opened up. The Weasley twins' story mode, brutal, repetitive, and gloriously unforgiving, Hermione's magic card mode, and Ted's own systems. Lee Jordan, once again playing the twins' hardcore mode, advised with trademark bluntness, "Go to the loo before you start. Only the toughest would play this twice. If you don't die 5, 6, 7, 8 times in each stage, you shouldn't even talk about clearing it." Hermione's magic card mode had 2 branches: PvP battles between players and a deck-building level-clearing mode where you built decks from random cards gathered in-game and tried to beat stages. The Ravenclaws loved the intellectual challenge. Slytherins did too, surprisingly. After McGonagall's suggestion about unity, Ted had deliberately invited Slytherin players and even recruited a few into the dev team. Hogwarts needed cohesion, not more divisions, especially given the threat of Lord Voldemort. Pulling some into the fold was smarter than alienating them. The most popular mode, though, was Wizard Alliance, a not-so-subtle homage to other 10-player multiplayer battle games. Even when a match required 10 players to start, people queued up enthusiastically. Ted had to bring out another game terminal to handle demand. At first, everyone was a noob, but soon a few players stood out. Harry, in particular, was excellent at combat. Even managing pieces in fights, she was skilled. Ron, on the other hand, was clumsy. He used Ted's hero piece, Stone Man, and missed his ultimate 3 times in a row, earning his older brother's mock blockage. They swore never to team with him again. Ron did have a hero he excelled at, barbecue puppet Rambo, whose lane pressure was deceptively strong. Top lane Rambo, Ron bragged, "Place your ultimate vertically, and your economy will be great." Jungle Mouse Jerry asked, "How's your economy then?" "Not so great," Ron admitted. Mid laner Iron Fist Harry retorted, "You missed all your ultimates. Of course your economy's bad." There were niche modes too, including Ted's absurdly satirical classic adventure mode with a title that raised eyebrows, Teeling Grand Theft Auto 2, Northeast Past Events, The Redemption of Ma Dashwai. The little wizards were too young to grasp the deep black humor now. It would hit them later when they'd been in the workforce for years, and they'd finally appreciate the effort Ted had put into it. The beta was noisy and messy, but it worked. And as more students logged on, learned, failed, and tried again, the game's influence quietly began to spread through the castle in a way that felt both dangerously exciting and, if Professor McGonagall was right, educational. Pigeon Day tomorrow. I can't do it. I don't feel like writing anymore. Ugh. The second beta test of the Magic board game wrapped up perfectly. Although a lot of bugs and balance issues had been uncovered, the overall framework was sound, and everyone left thrilled and confident. Little wizards who'd taken part in the internal test now swarmed Ted and his team at every lunch and dinner, pleading, "Call me for the next test. I'll bring my own rations." Those who'd only heard about it were just as insistent, nagging Ted to release it soon. "What else is there to test? We'll help," they begged. Ted had to manage expectations. He put out a firm notice. Only students whose year-end exam results rank in the top third of their year will be invited to the next test. We're worried about the impact on their studies. He didn't want to deal with Professor McGonagall's scrutiny, and besides, he had to encourage everyone to take their exams seriously. As for the fierce internal competition the project had sparked, well, the grueling schedule had ultimately been a blessing. When Ted sat down to review what the team had achieved, the payoff was bigger than he'd expected. The whole development process had been full of unimaginable technical hurdles, but passion carried them through. When Hermione later compiled the technical documents, she was stunned. There were dozens of breakthroughs and enough material for a dozen publishable papers. Ted swaggered into McGonagall's office with stacks of parchment scrolls, each titled with a different report. She was speechless after reading them, more achievement than she'd seen from all her students in 10 years. There were also smaller inventions, new magical props, materials, potion improvements, spell transfigurations. When Ted handed the improved potion formulas to Snape, the potions master, normally scowling and sarcastic, restrained himself. He even helped the students secure a dedicated page in Potions Today to detail the whole R&D process, and signed off with an unusually proud sentence. After teaching students for so many years, I finally feel my efforts haven't been in vain. Dumbledore, of course, heard about it too. News like this didn't stay hidden at Hogwarts. He pondered for a long time whether to make similar development projects a regular thing, to stimulate students' self-directed research and sharpen their abilities. Ted, who had a habit of smilingly appraising others and a near superhuman memory, could see the data. Every member of the project team had measurable growth. Even the least improved student gained 2 skill levels. One person's wizard profession leveled up twice. These were already top students, and now they were even further ahead. Magic is subjective, but the team's tireless experimentation pushed its boundaries. Ted hadn't expected such results. He'd only meant to freeload a bit at first. Next came a surprisingly long debate about a name. For 3 hours, the team argued while throwing out ridiculous contenders. None of the truly absurd options made it, but the names ranged from bland to wildly offbeat. In the end, Ted suggested one that won 90% approval. Since it was British, they christened it Ideal Land. Development was put on hold for the moment. People needed a break. High-intensity work couldn't go on forever. Efficiency drops and burnout looms. They'd rest their minds for 2 weeks and resume. Exams were only a fortnight away, and if they wanted a peaceful Christmas, they had to study. Ted sealed off the R&D classroom to enforce the break. No one was allowed in. Think by all means, plan your next steps, but no internal competition. This was rest time. That left many who'd become addicted to the game at loose ends. Ted and his group used the pause to farm through another chapter of the adventure book and got stuck again after the 4th level. Ted failed 3 times in a row, facing a devious level 13 dark wizard with a dozen level 8 to 9 dark creatures in advantageous terrain, while his own side carried 2 burdens. Everyone agreed it might be impossible to beat this year. Ted, however, was relentless. He treated these runs as experience farming. He charged in to kill as many as possible before his burdens got ambushed. His immediate plan was to level his mind mage to level 8, draw a talent card, and then upgrade his mind power to level 9. According to the system, level 9 was the cap, at least in this world. At that peak, mind power would be unimaginably potent. Mind power wasn't the same as magic power. Magic power measured raw magical energy and control. It was a baseline. The actual effect of a spell still depended on skill levels and proficiency. Mind power, by contrast, measured the intensity of one's mental force. At level 9, Ted believed it might even be able to bend reality. He planned to use that blessing when Ideal Land officially opened. If he could pull it off, the game would get the most positive feedback possible. He now thought the project was worth the investment. With Ideal Land temporarily off limits, the team found other ways to amuse themselves. In the secret base, Jerry was playing wizard's chess with Diddy, Neville's pet dog. In just a few months, Didi had grown to medium size, with long white fur spotted in black and a broom-like tail that stirred gusts whenever she wagged. A red marking on her chest formed a natural magical pattern. Neville walked her through the castle, the greenhouses, and even the edge of the forbidden forest every day. Didi's intelligence was frighteningly high. Sometimes Neville worried she looked down on him. She could play wizard's chess and was currently beating Jerry soundly. The old chess pieces on Ron's board were practically whispering to him. "Why not give us to Didi? You've basically abandoned us." Ron felt betrayed. "Neville, why don't you let Didi out for a walk? You can't have a proper dog cooped up playing chess all day," he protested. Didi turned her head and gave him a look that, if she could have spoken, would have said, "Mind your own business." Harry walked in holding a stack of cards. "What are you lot up to?" Ron glanced at his transfiguration notes and sighed. "Exams are coming, and I haven't reviewed transfiguration yet." Harry grinned. "Is that so? What about a game of wizard cards, then?" Ron leapt to his feet, shoving his notebook aside. Yes! Nobody in Gryffindor can beat me. Ted had locked up the wizard's chessboard, but the new project, officially called Wizard Cards, with Hermione leading, needed no board. Each player built a 30-card deck. When cards were played, they formed 3D manifestations on the table. Ron, proud of his saved magic crystals, slapped a card down. Come forth, global shared brain, rock golem Malphite. A clumsy rock golem lumbered into being, then bellowed its battle cry, unstoppable. It transformed into a meteor and hurtled down, smashing several of Harry's summoned minions. With a click, a face-down card in front of Harry flipped over. Chaos confused the target of the opponent's skill. A voice from Harry's card sneered, petty tricks, daring to show off before an expert. Mid-flight, Malphite veered and crashed into Ron's own minions instead, wiping out several low-level summons. Huh? Ron shouted. Jerry laughed. He loved Ron's exclamation, huh? Chapter 280, Christmas Gift Exams wouldn't wait for you to finish playing games. Fortunately, the youngsters' skill levels were already quite high. It was just that Jerry, Ron, and Neville hadn't realized they were already excellent students. The exams ended, and a fine, paper money-like snow began to fall, scattering the last semester away. Christmas was only a few days off. Then it would be the new year. Ted stood on the covered bridge outside the castle, watching the snowflakes grow larger until they filled his vision. He'd been here since 1991, nearly 3 years. He'd been busy, but it felt like he hadn't accomplished much. When had he, a laid-back youth, become so tense? Could it be true that great power brings great responsibility? Hermione emerged from the castle, wearing a fluffy hat and knitted gloves, several notebooks floating by her side. With exams done, she should be turning her attention back to the wizard card game. Hermione loved learning more than almost anyone, and Ted was often less studious, yet she approached him now without asking about his exams or the ideal land project. She stood beside him in silence, watching the snowfall. After a long moment, she said, "Come visit my home during the holidays next year. My father has been waiting for you for 2 years." Ted smiled. Okay. A week before Christmas, Professor McGonagall once again compiled the lists of students staying at school for the holidays. The number was unusually high, almost suspiciously so. She knew Ted planned to launch his magic game, Ideal Land, over Christmas, but she couldn't imagine so many students staying just to play a game. Ted had already reassembled the development team and begun final optimization. On Christmas morning, the sky was clear and bright. Ted sat on his bed looking out the window. While clear weather was nice, a Christmas without snow felt empty. He pulled out his wand, opened the window with a flick, and murmured, "Blizzard!" A thin beam of spell light shot from his wand into the sky. Clouds gathered, and in dozens of seconds, countless tiny snowflakes began to fall. A localized meteorological curse had formed, snow only over the castle. The world between earth and sky turned into a little scene in a crystal snow globe. Ted turned and saw his roommates staring at him, mouths hanging open in astonishment. The cold air from the open window had woken them. They had just seen Ted whimsically change the weather. Terry Boot stammered, Ted, what you just used was a meteorological curse." Ted nodded. "Sorry, I woke you." He waved and the window closed on its own. He tapped his wand and the fireplace flamed to life, warming the room. His roommates had always felt that living with Ted was like living in a different world. They knew he did things beyond their imagination, beyond ordinary students. But today, when they saw him cast a meteorological curse that blanketed the entire castle in snow with surgical precision, they realized the gap was huge. Even elite wizards usually used only minor weather magic, affecting a street with wind or rain. Ted controlled the weather over the whole castle with ease. The snow didn't stop until evening, and by then, everyone realized just how outrageous this was. After much anticipation, the moment finally arrived. It was still hours before the Christmas feast, but dozens of students staying for the holidays had already packed the Great Hall. Many from the development team were present, although Ted and the core creative members hadn't appeared yet. They'd spent the previous week running 2 rounds of urgent testing and had confirmed the game was ready. They had planned to give Ideal Land to their classmates as a Christmas gift. Excitement filled the hall. A student burst in, shouting, "They're here! They're here!" The crowd surged forward like fans greeting an idol group, but Ted raised his hand and everyone froze. They suddenly remembered crowding was forbidden during large gatherings to prevent stampedes. Faces flushed, they settled and applauded in unison. Classmates! Ted's voice carried without needing to be loud. He'd already pushed his mind mage level to 9, and a simple application of mind power made a quiet command feel natural and persuasive. He felt as if whatever he intended manifested itself. Our entire Ideal Land development team, 26 people, 3 months of effort, has finished the magic game Ideal Land for Christmas. Now, please allow me to introduce it. Ted's words flowed like honey, and everyone listened in rapt silence. He explained the project's initial concept, how it was meant to enrich after-school life and let students learn while they played. He carefully omitted the less savory truth about harvesting mind power and framed it as education through entertainment. He described the magic principle behind the game, a fusion of transcendental charm and daydream charm. Transcendental charm enhances the user's 5 senses. It's a difficult spell most people can't use without long practice, because sudden sensory amplification can cause disorientation, the magical equivalent of severe motion sickness. Daydream charm is like a powerful illusion, able to construct imagined scenes. Both spells were niche. Transcendental charm was taught by Sirius to his goddaughter and had already been applied in Neville's and Harry's combat systems, which is how Ted learned about combat wizard spells. Daydream charm had been unearthed by Ted after digging through the library and consulting many pureblood families. On their own, these spells were underappreciated, but layered with mind power, the mind manifestation Ted built into Ideal Land's base, they created something different. In the internal beta, it had been augmented reality. Now it was virtual reality. Ted also integrated contract magic into the game's core rules to maintain control. First, the basic items, he said. Magic chess pieces and wizard cards correspond to 2 different game modes. We'll give everyone initial chess pieces and blank cards. He explained the 3 routes to grow stronger in the game. First, pay. Buying more game chess pieces, blank cards to engrave, or other conveniences would accelerate progress. Ted was careful not to sell direct combat power, but selling convenience was fair. Second, grind. Tutorial levels and adventure and story modes would reward players with pieces and cards over time. Third, the route Ted most hoped players would take was effort of the heart. The more focused and dedicated your intent, the faster and stronger you'd form pieces, build decks, complete adventures, and even defeat other players. This was subjective magic. Create happiness with your heart. Of course, all 3 routes fed him: money, experience, and mind power. Triple win, he thought, and he was already pleased. He produced several fist-sized metal objects, tossed them casually on the long table, and they unfurled into 1.5 meter by 80 centimeter plates. Adamantine-plated goblin silver, etched with alchemical arrays and hair-fine runes. Place your hand on one, and you could play. The first batch of students took their chess pieces, set them on the boards, and were instantly transported into a strange world. Before them lay a huge stone-paved square. Not far off rose a gleaming crystal building. A gigantic, bizarre, magical beast stood nearby with a small house built on its back and goods dangling around it. A chubby merchant tended it. Colin Creevy gaped at the scenery, unsure what to do. Around him, Ron's sister Ginny and her friend Luna stood equally bewildered along with 4 other students. A sweet female voice chimed in. "Welcome to Summoner's Rift. I am your new player guide, 2185. For the first match, Ted rigged up a projector like the one he'd used for Magic Shadows at Secondhand Home, so the little wizards still waiting in line could watch the live feed. Story mode was supposed to draw the most attention, but in less than 10 minutes, all 7 players had been eliminated. Their deaths were bizarre and varied. Traps, ambushes, monsters that transformed a second time, self-destructing foes, and enemies that could call for help, summoning mobs to gang up on you. A 5th-year little wizard reached the end of the first level with great effort, then lasted 5 seconds against the boss. Charge! Knockdown! Execute! The player collapsed into a scatter of pixels. 3 more players refused to give up and tried the equipment. 2 made it to the end of the level. one managed to last 10 seconds against the boss. The magic silver golem boss felt explicitly built to counter wizards. Most of these kids had never seen a real battlefield, much less been burst down at point-blank range. Within minutes, over 80% of the crowd backed away. "This story mode is great. Let the others play first. I won't bother," they joked as they dispersed. Instead, they flocked to battle mode, 5v5. 10 little wizards, new to the ideal land, sat with goggles on, reclining in their chairs, already mentally inside the game. A novice guide calling herself Saria explained the basics: last hitting, laning, pushing towers, buying equipment. But suddenly being thrust into a strange world left most of them a bit dazed. The audience was ecstatic. "Move aside, I'll take it. Isn't this something anyone with hands could do? Use your stun. Don't you have a stupefy? Crowd control him." "Hey, Luna landed Expelliarmus perfectly. The opponent can't attack and is just standing there." Ginny follow up with Confringo. "Killed! First blood." The match finally staggered to an end after over an hour of chaotic play. It had been a total noob brawl, but Ginny's team scraped a win. By the end, everyone was brawling in mid lane. Push towers? How can you push towers when you're all busy beating each other up? Ted even considered adding a brawl mode. The results were too good. The ideal land's immersion was addictive. On Christmas Day, almost all the little wizards stayed in the Great Hall until evening. If Ted hadn't forcibly shut down the game, many would likely have stayed up all night. The response was phenomenal. Waves of cheers and groans, the energy of a championship final. Plenty of kids would be too hyped to sleep and would dream about the game, hopefully not about the first-level boss, the magic silver golem, Wizard Slayer. Ted's own gains that day were substantial. 658 experience points, almost a week's worth. His mind power had built up significantly, hard to quantify, but enough that he felt he could craft a powerful psionic item. Bitter cultivation and diligent practice were fine, but rapid growth came faster through exploitation. If he did this every day, he joked, he'd be in a position to crush Snape by the time he graduated. Snape, hunched in the dungeons over potion recipes, felt a sudden chill and glanced around. There was nothing visible, so he returned to his work. The ideal land project had stirred something in him. After years of academic complacency since Lily's death, he was finally finding motivation to develop new potion formulas. With the right drive over the past years, he might already be an internationally renowned potions master, but at least he was moving again. On a nearby table sat Ted's Christmas present to him, a complete set of chemical lab equipment. Ted's other gifts were just as thoughtful, or just as impractical. For Hermione, he'd made a butterfly hairpiece out of magic silver. The wings were woven from ultra-fine magic silver wire, weightless, fluttering gently with the wearer's movements. For Harry, a silver dough brooch that actually moved and occasionally glanced around. The material cost him 3 silver sickles. Neville got an enchanted alchemy shovel, 1 scoop, and it produced a neat cube of soil, capable of burrowing even through stone, perfect for his planting ambitions. Ron received a magic-powered mecha model alarm clock, meant to stop him from oversleeping. Jerry got a silent pendant that muted every sound he made with a light touch, ideal for stealth work. That evening at the Christmas feast, the professors who had stayed at Hogwarts and Dumbledore himself joined the students, sitting among them as they laughed over each other's gaming embarrassments. Ted even performed a rousing rendition of Bomba, and the Great Hall erupted. He produced a canister of cheering mist. A spray filled the room and forced everyone into smiles. The atmosphere skyrocketed. Some kids danced so hard their legs cramped. Professor Trelawney arrived last, peered through glasses thick as bottle bottoms, and refused to sit. There were already 12 people at the table with Dumbledore and McGonagall. If she joined, there would be 13. She insisted 13 was an unlucky number, and that the first person to stand would suffer misfortune. Ted rolled his eyes. Quietly, he reached under the table, felt around Ron's robes, and pulled out Scabbers. With a toss, he sent the rat skittering across the floor. Problem solved. The first to rise had been decided. Scabbers squeaked, "I," and disappeared. When Ted's Mind Mage level hit 8, he unlocked a new set of talent cards. 2 of the 3 options were unsettling. To survive, one must eat brains. Eating brains fuels psionic growth, The higher the intelligence of the creature, the better the effect. No thanks, he wasn't about to go full Hannibal and make brains his staple diet. Plant a seed of your mind power inside the mental sea of an intelligent being. If you die, the seed takes root, sprouts, and lets you seize their body to be reborn. For a moment, Ted was tempted. Who could guarantee they wouldn't die? The chance of rebirth was alluring, but it was a dangerous, irreversible path. Ted chose the safer, more social option, mind resonance. Resonate mentally with all sentient, willing beings within range to temporarily amplify your psionic energy. In other words, friends in the sky, friends on the ground, friends in the water, friends in the trees, lend me your strength. It was the psionic equivalent of a spirit bomb. That choice explained a lot about the ideal land's effect. Why were the little wizards so engaged, so energetic, so mentally sharper while playing? While gaming, they had been in mind resonance with Ted. Even without individual mind power, they felt clearer, faster, more awake, scalp tingling and mentally alert. Ted channeled that resonance into his spirit crystal servant, Parker, so it could put extra effort into scientific research. For many lower-level projects, Ted would sketch an inspiration and a development plan and let Parker do the rest. Parker was basically a research monk under a graduate supervisor, working day and night without needing to eat, sleep, or take breaks, exactly the kind of assistant Ted liked. 286, Demon Hunter Potion Encyclopedia. Demon Potion Encyclopedia. Ding, talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered. Discovered Witcher Potion Compendium. Green, Witcher Potion Compendium recorded the potion recipes of the Witchers, potent and toxic to ordinary people. Requires 230 experience to redeem. The Otherworld Knowledge roll from January 1994 had not been great. What a wasted opportunity. The Witcher potions weren't cutting edge compared to those from Azeroth. After all, Witchers were modified humans created by the mages of that world, only around for 300 years and nearly driven extinct. It made sense there wasn't much accumulated lore. Still, the Trial of the Grasses potion sounded intriguing. Ted's notes on modified creatures, scraps gleaned from Professor Quirrell, Lord Voldemort, and Slytherin, hadn't yet covered modified humans. This was a chance to fill that gap. There were also various sword oils for magical beasts, useful for research and broadening horizons. As the full moon approached, Ted went to Snape's office in the dungeons again. Snape was already using the set of Muggle chemical apparatus Ted had given him. It pleased him. For all the magic of their world, Muggle lab equipment was simpler and often more practical. Snape, despite being head of Slytherin and once a Death Eater, didn't have a Muggle bias. He was half-blood himself and had loved Lily, after all. "Take this potion to that fellow," Snape said, tossing a bottle to Ted. Ted caught it. Wolfsbane, meant to suppress a werewolf's transformation during the full moon, for Lupin. Snape would never make potions for Lupin out of charity, but Dumbledore had a way of making him do favors. Ted grinned and added, "Professor, I'm still a bit rough around the edges. Otherwise, I wouldn't let you do the heavy work." He was still not fully confident in his potion brewing. If he'd accidentally poisoned Lupin, Snape would have died laughing at the irony. 2 professors, 1 day. Ted took the potion to Lupin's office, thinking about werewolves all the way. Werewolves fascinated him. After transformation, their magic resistance increased dramatically, which explained their survival. What kind of change made that happen? Could it be learned? Could it be reversed? Vampires, by contrast, had integrated. They no longer hunted humans, but ran hospitals and blood banks in Muggle society, developed artificial plasma, and became legal citizens and philanthropists. Honeydukes even sold blood-flavored lollipops. Werewolves, however, suffered. Every month they transformed uncontrollably, the process agonizing. For days around the change, their faces went ashen, as if deathly ill, and they lost control. Bestial urges suppressed their humanity, and bites during that time would turn a victim into a werewolf unless treated before the night ended. Contagious, terrifying, tragic. How could anything good come from it? "Knock, knock, knock. Come in," Lupin said. "I brought you some sweet water," Ted said, smiling. He didn't call it a medicine. Better not to alarm the man. Snape had made the potion bitter on purpose, the first time Lupin had almost thrown up on taking it. Ted now added a touch of maple syrup that didn't alter the potion's effects to make it easier to swallow. Lupin took the bottle, looked at it with complicated gratitude, and drank it down. Ted sat and chatted with Lupin and Sirius for a while. He was planning to deal with Peter Pettigrew this year. He'd wanted to do it before, but several divinations had warned the timing wasn't right. Now, in the next month or two, Peter's luck would be at its lowest. It meant a tribulation he would not escape. Unless he survived it, he might turn a corner for the better. Ted had also made sure Trelawney's little jinx had nudged things along. Sirius is well, Lupin said. A bit restless. He wants to go to Italy with Olivia. Oh, Ted smiled. I have a small favor. Could you and Sirius put that trip off a little? Later in the year would be better. I promise he won't regret it. Lupin blinked at the roundabout way Ted delivered the request, but he didn't press. Lupin was empathetic and easy to be with. His company felt right. How's your research coming? He asked. Ted had been worrying about the ticking time bomb beneath Hogwarts, Morgana's emotional vault. The power trap there was immense. If it got loose, the castle itself could be imperiled. Dumbledore knew, but even he had no real method for dealing with an accumulation of raw, complex negative emotion. The Guardians before had only managed to seal it. Ted, as a mind mage, had more relevant theory, but not the reach or resources Dumbledore had. Lately, he'd been discussing plans with Sirius and Lupin via the fireplaces. Sirius was endlessly enthusiastic about the work, and their conversations made him feel like he was back with close friends in school. That feeling was good. When Ted entered the Great Hall later, voices were carrying from the card tables. How can a dragon rider lose? Tell me. 17 cards. Can you instant kill me? If I lose, I'll eat this table. Hurry up and play, the flowers are wilting. Pour Harry a cup of super sweet pumpkin juice. Ron was shouting from his corner. 7 or 8 younger students watched Harry and Ron play wizard cards. Then an astonishing thing happened. Harry drew one card after another and wiped Ron's 30 health points in one sweep. Ron's exclamation turned to stunned silence. Then Jerry burst out laughing, and the whole hall erupted into laughter. The Great Hall filled with light-hearted noise. Half a month later, development on Ideal Land had progressed smoothly. The team had begun a second round of maintenance and optimization. Some students loved 5v5 combat, some wizard cards, some strategy modes, some the story mode. There were still the stubborn hardcore players who thrived on challenge. Neville, for example, who had been defeated 100 times but kept fighting, now stood one step from beating the first boss. Many modes required genuine mastery. To create a spell card in wizard cards, you had to understand, or even master, that spell in real life. Item crafting and battle modes similarly depended on your skills. It pushed the students to learn. As Flitwick joked, he'd been asked about spells in the last fortnight more than in the previous 3 years combined. Harry's gaming talent was extraordinary. Whether dueling, cards, or adventure mode, she ranked among the best. She'd earned the nickname Gryffindor's Twin Wands and Swords and would declare in public chat, "I'm going to take on 10. Neville focused on magical plants versus zombies and story mode. Jerry favored 5v5 stealth burst tactics, earning him the moniker Sunny Happy Little Mouse. Hermione dominated the wizard card domain. Seeing how well Ideal Land was doing and how much the students enjoyed it, Ted decided to strike while the iron was hot. He would launch the Ideal Land Ultimate Tournament, Season 1. Generous rewards awaited the top 3 in each game category. Promotion was effortless. The twins would handle it. Whatever it is, tell Lee Jordan and the whole school will know, they said. Back in the secret base, Ted explained the Patronus charm to his companions. Flitwick had once devoted a class to it, but it wasn't something an ordinary wizard could learn. In the Ministry, there were likely no more than 5 people who could cast a true Patronus. It was an advanced spell, devilishly hard to master, and its uses were limited. It didn't help against physical threats, and few wizards learned it for everyday purposes. Even so, Ted intended to teach them. His friends listened with furrowed brows. Even Hermione and Harry looked troubled. There was no rush. Ted would use his mind powers to guide them toward the pure, joyous memories they needed. Unlike Ted, who often felt mentally older, his companions still had plenty of pure joy to draw on. In the original story, only 3 students had learned the spell by their 6th year: Harry, Hermione, and Cho Chang, and in the final battle, 3 more learned it, which showed how difficult it was. In the original timeline, Harry had mastered it before he turned 14. Learning the Patronus charm mattered for more than warding off Dementors. It could counter the negative emotions trapped in Morgana's vault. Ted's own Patronus had already evolved into a different form of magic with unusually strong effects. That magic might become a trump card for his friends in the battles to come. 287. How to make the Sheikah slate blue. It's been a bit boring lately, Ted muttered. His little wizards were all buried in preparations for the S1 tournament, and as the hands-off boss, he found himself with nothing to do. He had plenty of long-term projects, Dementor analysis and simulation, experimenting with puppet power sources, but none of them would be resolved in a hurry. It annoyed him to watch Gryffindor hog all the spotlight in the adventure book. Ted suspected Gryffindor hadn't left that sort of thing behind to help future generations so much as to show off. "Look how awesome I am," Ted could almost hear him say. Still, the little wizards were picking up combat experience from Ted that usually only comes from life-and-death situations. That kind of training made them stand out. Ron, for example, moved with a calm, practiced skill in combat mode that even some older students lacked. He had the air of a seasoned fighter. It would have been ideal if he didn't constantly connect to the global Morpheus brain network and make that daily "ah" sound. But one drawback couldn't ruin everything. Ted had accumulated a huge reserve of mind power through Ideal Land. He'd been lavish with it, but it had become effectively inexhaustible, so plentiful it was starting to overflow. No point letting it go to waste. Mind mages had their own psionic equipment, with effects that bordered on magic. Ted decided to combine alchemy and psionics to make something useful. He rummaged through years' worth of hoarded materials, a 12-meter basilisk tendon, a top-grade magical component he'd secretly kept after butchering a basilisk, piles of acromantula silk, gifts from the Forbidden Forest inhabitants. With Necromancer Ryan's recent rampage, acromantula resources were going to be scarce for a long time. Troll beards he'd collected from battles, immensely strong but rarely used, were dragged out for this project. Plenty of unicorn hair, too. Hagrid always looked after them and collected their yearly shed. During Ryan's onslaught, the unicorns had been smart enough to flee first. Their innate pure magic helped restrain the undead and bought them time to escape. Ted also dug out Demiguy's hair, alchemy scales, a little adamantine silk, and a large quantity of mithril silk. Ted pooled a vast amount of psionic energy, letting it envelop him and the materials. Threads of mithril and spider silk glowed faintly white and floated under his control, woven and fused as he willed them together. He poured mind power into every fiber and refined the whole structure again and again. The crafting took more than 3 hours. When he finally touched down to steady himself, exhausted, a silver-white translucent rope lowered into his hand. The golden rope. It had consumed enormous material and psionic investment and was built on the same principles as an animated magical rope. It could be made long or short, thick or thin. It could be tough enough to hoist 1,000 caddies or supple enough to slip through the narrowest crack. It had a measure of autonomy, able to bind enemies or make stealthy, invisible strikes on command. Ted weighed it in his palm. It felt nearly weightless. He casually looped it around his waist, just in case. With a golden rope in his sleeve, wandering the North Sea in the morning and ending up in Britain by evening suddenly seemed entirely possible. February blinked into being. A notification chimed in Ted's mind. Ding. Talent, Otherworld knowledge, triggered. Discovered, Sheikah slate manufacturing method. The entry explained that the Sheikah slate was a magical tool invented by the Sheikah tribe, used for organizing information and activating temples and towers. It required 350 experience to exchange. At first, Ted had misread it and thought it might be the Philosopher's Stone, the ancient alchemical pinnacle, but the description made it clear it was something else entirely. In his head, it was closer to Link's travel simulator, a device for storage, activation, and personal use. Interesting. Ted exchanged the experience without hesitation. It was perfect, just what he'd been hoping for, but hadn't known how to find. He'd been trying to figure out how to make personal accounts for Ideal Land players. This was the missing piece. Ideal Land, after the initial seed of free content, had already started turning a small profit. Most of the little wizards didn't have much money, so letting them know that rare tools weren't easy to obtain would encourage them to pay for the experience. This was something he could charge for. Ted called the development team into the project classroom. Friends, new assignment. I found a rare magical tool technology. We're going to integrate it into Ideal Land and set up a personal account system. It'll give everyone more content. They attacked the task with gusto. Because the Sheikah Slate's manufacturing process was rich and complete, it mostly had to be adapted to the Ideal Land system. They connected the slate's functions to the game disk and built the personal authentication on top of it. Ted implemented identity verification using Mind Power's personality recognition and the unique arcane mark each user's magic produced. The combination made accounts safe and personal. In a few feverish days, the classroom was nearly always occupied. The team worked there as soon as classes ended. By February 9th, the basic framework was in place. That evening, Ron and the others rushed into the classroom, clutching their textbooks. As they reached the doorway, Ron and Jerry both twitched their noses. "What's that smell?" Jerry asked. "It smells amazing," Ron replied. They pushed the door open and saw a dozen classmates already gathered around a large pot simmering in the middle of the room, white dumplings bobbing on the surface. "What is this?" Ron stared. "Dumplings. Grab plates and help yourselves," Ted announced. Ted had improvised a dumpling machine that kneaded dough, piped in filling, and produced dumplings in a steady, efficient stream. There were 3 fillings on offer, a 3-delicacy mix of chives, egg, and shrimp, a beef and radish filling, and pork and cabbage. The aroma filled the room. Ted had checked the calendar the day before and realized it was Lunar New Year back in China. He'd started to miss dumplings. What used to be just a tradition now tugged at him when he was far from home. Cooking them made him and everyone else feel a little less homesick. The dumplings were an instant hit. The project team ate their fill and then kept bragging about them to other students the next day. The little wizards begged to have dumplings added to the Hogwarts menu. The school menu was already dozens of pages long, but how could he refuse? Even the house elves came by to ask Ted for lessons. For a whole week, the dumpling options rotated, with a different filling each day. The dumpling craze made Ted a little nervous about the future obesity rate of the little wizards, but they were happy, and the house elves were thrilled with the new recipes. Ron even asked the house elves confidentially if they could invent a chicken leg-filled dumpling. The Sheikah Slate project moved on. The rope hung at Ted's hip, and life in the development classroom was suddenly a lot less boring. 288. Arrangement. On the morning of February 14th, the castle hummed with an invisible, restless pink energy. It was Valentine's Day, after all. Young love was nothing if not loud and obvious. These kids were already 13 or 14. A little giddiness was unavoidable. Even Hermione, who usually tossed her books into the Great Hall and paid no mind to her looks, didn't rush through breakfast that morning. She spent 20 minutes fussing in front of her mirror. The hair comb Ted had given her tried out several styles before she was satisfied, and she smeared on a whitening pearl cream Ted had developed. Her skin didn't need it. Youth was already fair and smooth, but she persisted in the new ritual. Ted had just finished morning exercises with Neville and, entering the Great Hall, felt a flutter when he spotted Hermione. He smiled and said, "Hermione, you look really beautiful today." Hermione tried to seem composed, but the smile threatened to burst. "Really? Clara insisted I try this hairstyle this morning. What do you think? Is it okay?" "It's perfect." Clara, still half in bed in the dormitory, called down in mock surprise. "Someone talking about me?" Ginny and Luna arrived arm in arm earlier than usual. Ron, who had been speculating with Jerry about how strange Hermione was acting, had blinked when he realized Ginny had put on makeup too. Imitating Ted's tone, he said, "Ginny, you look really beautiful today." Ginny shot her brother a look. "You're not so bad yourself." She walked past Ron and greeted Neville with a smile. "Neville, good morning," Ron muttered, baffled. Everything felt slightly off. Hermione giggled and whispered with Ted. Ginny was blushing with Neville. Lavender kept sidling up to Ron, giggling. Harry, at least, seemed the same. loose robes, brisk stride, until Ron and Jerry noticed him duo-queuing with Malfoy to climb the ranks in some wizarding ladder. "Malfoy, where's your Norwegian Ridgeback?" Harry called. The pair worked together perfectly, snagging 80 points and landing in the top 10 of the ladder. Ron and Jerry hissed in disbelief. Whenever the castle celebrated, Ted's voice was practically mandatory. He sang through the morning, "She taught me how to yodel," with an enthusiast named Yodel joining, and the place brightened. Then he launched into Dalabengba, a 4-part piece with male, female, old, and young lines that made several people refuse to believe it was only Ted's voice. Halfway through the chorus, something odd happened. In his secret base, Ted's red dragon egg wiggled. A ping of text appeared in his mind. Talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered, discovered T-virus map, green. The T-virus map, green, recorded the genetic map of countless strains of a novel RNA virus. One Umbrella Corporation would later isolate by combining an ancient progenitor virus with leech gene fragments. The entry told him it required 100 experience to exchange. Ted stared. He'd never seen such cheap otherworld knowledge. Of all things, zombies. He scowled. They already had enough trouble with the undead. Now his systems wanted to hand him a catalog of viral genomes? March's otherworld knowledge had been wasted enough. He'd rather keep working on herbal potions and alchemical bombs. The Witcher-style explosives had promise, and Hagrid had been testing prototypes and sending back notes. That weekend, Professor McGonagall finally announced that students could go to Hogsmeade to shop again. The castle erupted with cheers. Since the appearance of the zombie dog, no one had been allowed out for months. The children were desperate for fresh air and shops. Ted also saw in his divination that Scabbers' luck had bottomed out. "Ted, I still have one experiment to finish," he told Ron and Jerry. "Tomorrow, I need you to help check out a shop for sale in Hogsmeade." Ron's fork clattered. "Ted, are you opening a shop?" "It's not really mine. Fred and George are itching to start early, so we're partnering with them to open a joke shop in Hogsmeade as a test." Ted explained that property prices in Hogsmeade were low, and an old clothes shop had been recommended. "Can you check the location and see if it needs renovations?" "And the rat tonic you wanted?" "It arrived, but the owl had some trouble, so it's in Hogsmeade. Pick it up. Let Scabbers try it. If it does nothing, get a refund." Mention money snapped Ron into businesslike focus. He decided he'd take Scabbers along and make him drink the tonic. If nothing happened, he'd return it immediately. Scabbers had been shedding lately. Ron worried the old rat was dying. 10 years was a miracle for any rodent. Ted also asked Lupin and Sirius to come to Hogsmeade the next day. He needed their help with something. But when Jerry went into the shop to scope it out, the place was stranger than any boarded-up storefront. A box trap ambushed him and sucked him into an underground space. He wasn't physically hurt, but the basement was an abandoned maze, passages branching everywhere, clutter piled about, and a confusing enchantment that muddled his sense of direction. He wandered and couldn't find an exit. He pulled out his two-way mirror to call Ted. Nothing. The place was covered in dampening magic. Panic prickled at him, but he forced himself to think, "Don't rush. Find Ron first. If help doesn't arrive, they'll come looking. Self-preservation first." Ron's luck was worse. He'd slipped and badly twisted his leg when he fell into the same cellar. He sat against a wall, clutching the small device that hung around his neck, the first machine, watching the dim, silent corridors. If anything moved, he'd trigger it. For now, there was only aching pain. He pulled Scabbers out of his pocket and whispered, "Jerry, where are you? Scabbers, you've got to find Ted. You hear me? I need help." He tossed the rat down the corridor. Scabbers glanced up and scurried away. Ron's hope was thin. He could only pray the little creature understood and would find someone. But Scabbers wandered through the abandoned passage, and the rat's course took a strange turn. The small animal padded along, then slowly and horribly shifted, expanding into a short, fat, sleazy man. He hunched, eyed the empty halls with a tremulous, guilty terror. He twisted his hands, hesitated, then turned and began moving away from the Weasley boy with a resolve that left him looking feverish and desperate. Pettigrew muttered to himself as he walked, "That kid Ted is terrifying. I can't stay at the Weasleys anymore. I'll run. Leave Britain, Eastern Europe, Africa, anywhere. Go now." Wish Ron luck, then leave. Ted sat with a crystal ball in his hands and let himself smile. For the past 10 years, Pettigrew had slipped quietly under the Weasleys' protection like a fox under a scholar's robe. Now the chaos the children stirred up had finally cost him his borrowed safety. He felt the headache of all that luck spent. There was a knock on his door. Knock, knock, knock. Sirius's voice called from outside. Ted, we're here. Ted set the crystal ball down and straightened, feeling a thread of unease he couldn't shake. 289. 10 years ago, 14 years earlier, Professor Trelawney made a prophecy in the Hog's Head, and Severus Snape overheard part of it. He carried what he'd heard to Lord Voldemort. Because Snape had only heard the beginning, Voldemort was misled by the prophecy, and in doing so, set in motion the very chain of events the prophecy foretold. Voldemort began searching Great Britain for families who fit the description: a child born as the 7th month dies, to parents who had thrice defied him. The most promising candidates were among his old enemies in the Order of the Phoenix. No one outside that circle had defied him 3 times and still lived. By then, Voldemort and his Death Eaters had been ravaging the British wizarding world for nearly a decade. Tom Riddle inherited more than just a name from Salazar Slytherin. He inherited talent and a ruthless ambition. At school, he was outstanding enough to form a clique called the Knights of Walpurgis. Walpurgis Night, an old druidic festival on April 30, May 1st, associated in folklore with bonfires and rites, came to be linked with nocturnal gatherings of witches and demons. That Tom would invoke the name shows his appetite for grand, ominous symbolism from an early age. Most of the knights were purebloods. Some older members never became Death Eaters, but the younger ones, and their successors, became the movement's first generation. As a half-blood, Tom could never have become the purebloods' champion by right, but his brilliance, cunning, and the Slytherin legacy he cultivated after leaving school, after 10 years of travel and the loss of his nose, made him powerful enough to take that role. What had always been a struggle over influence and privilege among pureblood families hardened into politics of domination and greed. But then Tom broke with any pretense. He went mad. Tom Riddle was no mere bully. He was brilliant and brutal. From the basilisk's attack that killed Myrtle, to his discovery and slaughter of relatives, to the making of multiple Horcruxes, including the murder that produced the Golden Cup, he began to split his soul and remake himself. Creating Horcruxes didn't only extend his life, it increased his power. In terms of raw magical ability, he surpassed even Dumbledore. But his actions were not only about fear of death or a thirst for power. He seemed to be severing himself from everything shameful in his past. His face, even his name, vanished beneath the identity of Lord Voldemort. Where a handsome, charming Tom Riddle had once been, something unrecognizable and monstrous now stood. The pureblood families who had once supported him began to see he no longer represented them. He had become something else, a terrorist who spread only death and destruction. Worse, those closest to him appeared brainwashed. Given an order to betray family, a follower would not hesitate. After a decade of terror, 7 or 8 pureblood houses in Britain disappeared altogether. Many coerced into serving Voldemort longed privately for days without him, but fear and his ruthlessness kept them trapped. Then the prophecy returned hope. 2 children fit its terms. Neville Longbottom, born at the end of July and reported to Voldemort by a pureblood, and James and Lily Potter's son, Harry, also born at the end of July, reported by Peter Pettigrew. Peter was not brave. Cowardice had driven him into the hands of the Dark Lord. Frightened of Voldemort and of death, he joined the Death Eaters to save himself. At first, Voldemort's intent wasn't to destroy the Potters in particular. He intended to plant a spy inside the Order. There were 2 children who matched the prophecy. His original plan had been to eliminate both to prevent future trouble. But Peter, in his fear and clumsiness, told Voldemort the wrong details, claiming the Potter's child was a girl, so Voldemort decided to deal with the Potters later and take care of Longbottom first. That postponement lasted for over a decade. When Voldemort fell to his own rebounding curse, his followers were suddenly leaderless. Many non-fanatical Death Eaters fled the country or tried to bargain their way out. Some informed on comrades like Igor Karkaroff. Others purchased freedom with bribes, like Lucius Malfoy claiming imperious control. Severus Snape survived because Dumbledore vouched for him, presenting him as a spy. The true fanatics, however, went to Azkaban, Bellatrix Lestrange among them, imprisoned and raving, a fanatic who would later be revealed as the guardian of one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, the Golden Cup, hidden in her vault. Even after Voldemort's disappearance, Bellatrix never stopped searching for his whereabouts. She found Peter and threatened to expose his betrayal, forcing him to bring the Potters to an ambush so she could interrogate him. Harry later heard the last moments of his parents through the hollow tremor of a Dementor, brief, maddening echoes that haunted him. It was Peter's treachery, his sudden flight, stabbing James in the back, that broke the Potters' defense. Otherwise, they might have held out until rescue. They were saved only by how quickly Sirius and the others arrived. Sirius had a small distress device, magic he'd obtained thanks to the house elves, that pinpointed the Potter's location and warned him they were in danger. Peter did not know about that. His cowardice went further. He faked his own death. He arranged a charred, mutilated body to stand in for him in the battle, and so escaped the vengeance of his former friends. If a man is officially dead, one cannot easily denounce him. The blame was left on the Death Eaters alone. For years after, Sirius spent vast sums trying to destroy his cousin's old circle of Death Eaters in Azkaban, and he failed. It was later suspected that Voldemort had taught his inner circle methods to blunt a Dementor's effects, which might explain how some core Death Eaters survived more than a decade in Azkaban without going mad. Others, like Sirius, had used Animagus forms or other cunning to deceive or withstand Dementors. The endurance of these people through 10 years of imprisonment was a mystery and a grim testament to their fanaticism. I've decided to add another chapter. On the 12th, I have to go back to my hometown for my cousin's promotion banquet. This month's leave slips won't be enough. 290. Save the wizard Ron. Come in quickly, Ted called, swinging the door wide. Sirius and Lupin stood on the threshold. Ha, kid, tell us. What do you need our help with? Keep it simple. I want half a day of blissful solitude this afternoon, Sirius joked, clapping Ted on the shoulder. He dropped onto the sofa and poured himself and Lupin some tea. No milk, no sugar? That's not proper, he complained after sipping Ted's black tea, wagging a finger in mock disapproval. Lupin smiled as he took in the room. He had nothing planned for the weekend and was glad for the chance to spend time with old friends. Thinking of his old companions pushed a faint sadness through him. Ted had never shown his 3 safe houses to them. After all, when property prices fell, Ted had snapped up a bargain. Owning a home was important to him. Once everything settled, he swore he'd build a 1,000-square-meter mansion. Ted set a stack of parchment on the coffee table. Sirius peered and laughed out loud. Ha! Ha! He threw his head back. For this to end up in your hands, there's something almost miraculous about it. It was the Marauder's map. Lupin reached forward and stroked the paper, nostalgia softening his features. Even Sirius felt a tug of feeling. Then Ted's expression turned serious. I have to apologize first, he said. What I'm going to tell you might stir up painful memories. It could hurt. Both men fell silent, exchanging puzzled looks. I know what happened with Harry, Ted went on, and I know a name. This all started about a year ago when the Weasley twins gave me the map. He told them how, earlier that year, while examining the map, he had noticed, only after zooming in carefully, that there was an unfamiliar name listed in Neville and Ron's dormitory. He admitted he hadn't inspected their beds closely before. Unless you specifically magnify an area, the map's lines and names blur together. It was easy to miss subtle changes. Sirius and Lupin's faces tightened. Ted took a breath. What surprised me even more was that I'd heard the name before, someone who should have been dead for over 10 years. Peter Pettigrew. Sirius rose to his feet, voice hoarse. Impossible, he roared. Absolutely impossible. Peter's dead. He's been dead for over 10 years. Lupin was shaken too. He had more reason to trust Ted. If Ted said it, he had checked. So the possibility gnawed at him. Sweat broke out on his brow. His lips trembled. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed memories he did not want to face. Sirius tried to reason it away. Ted must have misread the map, or the map could be malfunctioning. Magic has glitches. He refused to go deeper. Meanwhile, not far away in the underground labyrinth beneath an abandoned shop, Jerry had already solved a few puzzles and pushed farther into the ruins. Ron, with his injured leg, was stuck in place. Scabbers, the rat, had been gone for 10 minutes. The longer Ron waited, the more panicked he became. He had to try something else. Aside from his wand, some loose change, and a first-generation device the others teased about, Ron had the Sheikah slate. It was new, only 2 days old, and still in internal testing, but perhaps it could help. He found, after fiddling, that it could connect to the ideal LAN network. Hogsmeade was far from the castle. Would the signal reach? He poured magic into the slate. The tablet glowed with intermittent runes, like a card waking. The connection held, weak but usable. He forced a limited message through. Ron, help, Hogsmeade underground. At the same time, during the holiday, Harry, who'd been playing ranked matches with Malfoy for ladder points, saw that message pop up on the network and yelped, springing to her feet. She tore off her gaming glasses and ran to the boys' dormitory. "Where's Ron?" she demanded of Neville. "He and Jerry went to Hogsmeade." "Why?" "Not good." Harry grabbed her two-way mirror. It was bulky and not easy to carry, but it worked like a landline. She pinged Hermione through their contacts instead. "Ted, Ron and the others are in trouble in Hogsmeade." "Ted's out. He went to see Sirius," Hermione answered. "Damn it, we can't wait. Meet at the castle gate." "Okay, I'll bring things," Hermione added, and slipped into Ted's lab in his secret base. She shoved a number of gadgets and props into her space pouch, magical tools, and a few of Ted's alchemy devices. The most eye-catching was a 5-centimeter glass vial holding a tiny globe of crackling lightning. The Hogwarts rescue team assembled with one objective: save Wizard Ron. "Help! Someone, please! Save me!" A weak female voice echoed through the underground. Jerry's round ears twitched. He strained to pinpoint the sound. From a shadowed corner, Jerry, keeping himself invisible, watched the girl slumped against the wall. Her leg looked injured. "Who's there?" she whispered, alarmed. Jerry stepped forward, wand ready. "Who are you? I'll help." Her eyes went blank. Then her mouth unhinged unnaturally. Her upper jaw slid up beneath her eyes. The lower jaw flipped down, revealing a mechanical inner mouth. A clicking sound. Then 3 razor-sharp thorns shot out and pierced Jerry's form. For an instant, he wavered and seemed to dissipate. 2 spells erupted from another angle. Enemy-repelling jinx, Defindo. The bolts struck the strange puppet, shattering it into pieces. A very human-like head rolled to Jerry's feet. It staggered, then lay still. Jerry had used an illusion to trick the automaton. This underground maze was clearly man-made, rigged with puzzles, traps, and clockwork monsters. He reconstituted himself, shaken but alive. Not far off, Ron faced his own danger. A spider-shaped automaton patrolled, its metal legs whispering over stone and making his scalp prickle. Then Harry, Hermione, and Neville burst into the corridor through a teleportation box they had found in the abandoned shop, having used it to enter the labyrinth. It turned out Ted had transformed the old underground ruins into a real-life horror game, part amusement park, part trap. Ted's plan had been clever and a little cruel. He'd intended to use the maze to flush Peter Pettigrew out and force him to leave Ron alone. He'd also hoped that by exposing his friends to certain staged threats, he could trigger their Patronuses to manifest. To that end, he'd placed creatures in the maze that only a Patronus could effectively repel, artificial beings he'd designed from Dementor lore called Dementor smoke. They weren't fully refined, like his ghost stone research, but the Dementor smoke was already operational and dangerous. He hadn't expected Ron to break his leg. That was bad luck. Ron's injury complicated everything. The network only covered parts of the castle. The Sheikah slate's weak ping had made it possible to call for help, but rescuers were racing into an environment built to detect and defeat ordinary magical defenses. Ted stared at the Marauders map. Fury and regret and hope tangled together. Peter Pettigrew's name on Ron's bed was a new and terrible development, and now their only course was to get into the maze and drag Ron out before whatever had taken hold of this place could do more damage. Where wizards gather, strange things happen, and Hogsmeade, the only all-wizard village in Britain, was no exception. Oddities were part of everyday life there, so most residents barely blinked anymore. One place, however, had a reputation that even the hardiest witch or wizard respected: a century-old shop that everyone swore was haunted. The shop had once belonged to a brilliant, eccentric wizard who, back when the dark arts were more common, had devoted himself to puppet magic. He built a vast studio and living quarters beneath the house, filling them with every kind of automaton and figure he could imagine. He meant no harm, only to indulge his hobby, but after his death, the residual magic began to animate some of the creations. Worse, a spirit creature, a mischief imp, was born among the toys. It was the sort of nuisance that made buyers give the place back to the ministry. 3 consecutive owners returned it. Rumors said a powerful wizard did purchase it once, but he vanished a few years later and the property went back into public hands. For generations, it remained unsold. Ted saw a different possibility. He repurposed the underground maze, turning the old studio into a testing ground and a proving arena. The place was full of puppet creatures, and Ted added something else, wisps of Dementor-like smoke. It couldn't harm flesh directly, but it attacked the lungs and the will. As a thin, insubstantial mist, it was largely immune to ordinary spells. A shield charm couldn't stop it, wind couldn't scatter it, fire couldn't burn it, water couldn't drown it, and even Defindo was useless. The friends had been through the maze before and had been driven out by that mist. On their retreat, they'd stumbled across Ron, limping and being chased by a grotesque puppet spider, its legs cobbled from a dozen puppet arms and thighs, its head a cluster of puppet faces. Even Harry had been startled. The encounter had unlocked something in Ron. Despite his lame leg, he'd burst forward with a 100-meter sprint, surprising them all. Their handbook on adventures and wizarding combat had taught them a lot, and Ted took satisfaction in how their experience had hardened them. Now he wanted to push them further, to see if he could draw out their ability to cast the Patronus charm. Meanwhile, elsewhere, truth was catching up with old ghosts. Sirius and Remus had finally accepted a bitter possibility. Peter Pettigrew was still alive, and he might be the traitor. Peter had fled to the Shrieking Shack, one of Hogsmeade's most notorious haunted houses. That building's reputation came from the night Remus had first transformed while they were at school. The screams and noises had earned it its name. Familiarity made it a natural hiding place for Peter, who planned to wait until nightfall and then slip away. He had no desire to seek out Voldemort. Working for him was worse than being a rat, and he feared being exposed by the friends he'd betrayed. Ted, meanwhile, had planted a tracking charm on him. As long as Peter stayed in Britain, he couldn't hide for long. Ted's closest allies were already on their way. Ted hadn't expected one complication. Lupin had been seen leaving, and Snape, who'd spotted Sirius meeting Lupin halfway, began to follow them, convinced they were up to something. Fate, then, drew all of them back to the Shrieking Shack, the place where so much had once begun. Back in the maze, Hermione had the foresight to bring a small bear mech, one of her workshop souvenirs. It wasn't the huge front-line machine, which was too bulky for the corridor, but it was the perfect size here. Its speech function had been restored, and inside it, Ron tried to be useful despite his limp. He acted as the squad's frontliner, taking the brunt of several puppet attacks. "Hermione, one more I can't hold on," Ron shouted from the bear's cockpit. Hermione, clever and efficient, was running support. The puppets themselves were a nuisance, but a ring of Dementor smoke was circling, trying to find a way into the mech to choke Ron's lungs. They had no reliable defense. The only thing that had shown any effect before was Neville's golden light, but Neville could barely channel it, and for now could only use it on himself. Ron looked frantic. "Please, something. Use that bottled lightning again," Hermione snapped, exasperated. "There isn't another one. There was only one bottled lightning spell on the shelf, and I already used it." Ted had been right to produce impossible things. The alchemy bomb, bottled lightning, was exactly that, a contained chain lightning spell wrapped inside a fragile bottle. Smash it, and the blast was devastating. But there were no more. Neville, though, shoved his wand forward and made a move. A warm, golden light spilled from the tip, not a full Patronus, but a sacred, shining ward he'd learned to conjure for himself. He plunged into the mist, hacking at it with the light and forcing it back. Puppet parts scattered across the corridor. The bald puppet heads with empty sockets looked more horrible than they had any right to. Jerry, who'd been fighting at the rear, kicked a few of those heads aside, and his foot struck something iron-bound in the corner. "Ha! A treasure chest," he called, eyes bright. In the maze, there were always chests, coins, odd materials, and trinkets of value. Jerry had already opened 2 earlier, netting a tidy 10 galleons, and he wanted more. He went to pry it open, but the chest opened on its own. From inside stretched a several-meter-long, purplish-red, slimy tongue that wrapped around Jerry's waist and dragged at him. 2 large eyes stared from the chest's lid, and when its mouth opened, the rows of sharp teeth inside gleamed. It was a mimic. "Behind you!" Ron barked from the bear mech, jamming his padded paws into the mimic's maw to keep it from swallowing Jerry. Harry leapt up and slammed the butt of his wand, transfigured into a stout magical club, into the mimic's head. "For me!" he yelled. Mimics were dangerous if you opened them alone, but together they could be handled. Still, the Dementor smoke was thickening, and Neville was straining to keep it at bay. Hermione cursed under her breath. "There's only one spell that can truly repel this." "What spell?" Ron demanded. Harry, Neville, and Jerry answered at once. "The Patronus charm. If a Dementor-like thing wanted to attack thoughts and hearts, then only a Patronus, pure, bright, and protective, would drive it away." Across town, in the shrieking shack, Peter, still in his rat form, had been caught. Remus's spell forced him back into human shape, and now he stood trembling before Sirius and Remus, hands out, voice thin with panic. "No, don't. Sirius, Remus, I was under the Imperius. Someone controlled me. I couldn't help it." He began to wail, the old, familiar cowardice. He knew his former friends were not monsters. If he could sound helpless enough, maybe they'd spare him. Outside the door, a dark figure crouched and listened, very still. Whatever judgment awaited Peter, someone else was there in the shadows, taking it all in. 292, Cruciatus Pettigrew. Thank you to my book friend Choo Choo for the generous reward. Ron's voice trembled with despair. The 5 of them stood back to back in a tight circle, surrounded in the vast hall by more than a dozen Dementor smoke. At the far end of the hall was the only exit, yet the smoky creatures hung in the air and along the ceiling like living wisps, circling them and hissing with a bone-deep whoosh, whoosh. "We're done for. I never thought I'd be strangled to death by smoke." Ron's voice cracked. "Don't give up. At least we can choose how we die," his friend Jerry offered. Ron shot him a bitter smile. "Thanks. That really fills me with courage to fight to the death." He drew a breath, opened the cockpit, and was climbing out of the bear mech. "What are you doing? Get back in. The bear can hold you a little longer," Harry cried. Ron forced a grin. "Holding on a few more minutes will just mean more suffering. You're the fastest. Get out and save yourself. If you make it through, I'll launch the first machine in a last desperate attempt." "You're mad. The first machine will get stuck in here." There wasn't much room. A mech jamming underground could have unpredictable consequences. Worse, apparition into rock came to mind. But Ron didn't care. The first machine still had its overclocked overload function. It would only last a second, but that single second might be enough to get his friends out. "My mind's made up." Ron reached for the tiny first machine pendant hanging at his throat. Just as he went to rip it loose, Neville's hand clamped over his wrist like an iron vice. "Wait," Neville said quietly. "Let's try the Patronus charm again." The golden light that shimmered around them was fading fast. If anything could save them, it was the Patronus. They began to recall what Ted had told them back at the secret base. The Patronus charm is about sparking a deep, positive conviction in your heart. Only the most powerful of beliefs can form one. Happiness is one kind of positive belief, and it's the easiest to find, but it's not the only one. A wizard's power comes from magic, but more so from belief. You can pour your own belief into the Patronus. When you fight with everything you have to protect something, it will answer you. All 4 closed their eyes halfway, searching for the deepest convictions in their hearts: happiness, courage, devotion, anything that could be summoned now. "Come on, we need you. I won't let my friends die." The golden light around Neville thinned. The Dementor smoke drifted closer, their hissing growing louder, cold mist creeping into their nostrils. Ron's eyes widened. He clenched the first machine against his throat. Screw it, now or never. Just as the golden light winked out and Ron tore the machine free, an even brighter, more brilliant gold flared up. Expecto Patronum. Who else but me? Neville cried. Ron looked, startled. When the darkness fell, a golden, flame-like magic burst from Neville's body. The flame spread outward, brushing over the others, instantly forcing the Dementor smoke back. One wisp that had been too close was singed and shriveled to a third of its size. The golden fire also wrapped around Neville's wand, transforming it into a blazing golden longsword. "What the? This is a Patronus!" Ron blurted. Neville grinned, proud and breathless, activating Holy Sword mode. Ted, watching through his crystal ball on the sofa, blinked in mild surprise. He'd intended to end this trial. After all, the Patronus charm is notoriously difficult. It requires tapping into the deepest courage of the heart. It isn't only a matter of talent, but of painful inner tempering. That was the point of his trial, the crucible that made Ron limp. But he'd also prepared a backup, an exorcism spell he'd invented, the monster expulsion spell, with the incantation, "Demons and monsters, begone! Retreat! Retreat! Retreat!" The spell was enough to keep evil things at bay, but its range was tiny, barely adequate for self-preservation. Yet at the crucial moment, Neville, the golden-hearted one who had endured the most spiritual testing, had broken through. He'd poured the belief of selfless sacrifice into the charm and combined it with his trained fire-breathing method and his light of soul, holy light. The result was a golden, flame-type guardian spirit. Of course, Ted noted, Neville's Patronus was unusual. Ted had been experimenting with an offshoot of the Patronus charm, his own guardian spirit charm, a hybrid that merged Patronus mechanics with chaos magics for creating deities and elements from otherworld knowledge like Ashes of the Lone Wolf, Green, plus emotional magic traditions from Ravenclaw and Morgana. In Ted's version, the Patronus could be reshaped by the caster's defining beliefs. Turned aggressive, it could become a guardian deity that destroyed threats. He'd even used rare, symbolically charged materials. He'd gone so far as to smuggle in Eastern dragon bones for his experiments. Neville's version was pure and simple. Belief in sacrifice, forged into holy flame. Ted's theoretical incantation was, "Great Heavenly Dragon." Neville's, less formally, had been, "Who else but me?" There were precedents for variations. Ancient Greece remembered a wizard called Invincible Andros, said to summon a giant Patronus of unknown form. Dumbledore himself had a unique Phoenix Patronus with functions beyond the original charm, as had been seen in the Forbidden Forest. Whatever the lineage, Neville's variant packed real destructive power, more than a typical Patronus, and brutally effective against magical beings like the Dementor smoke. Ted watched, half amused, as his creations were annihilated. Over a dozen Dementor smoke, creatures that had taken a week and 100 galleons in materials to craft, were snuffed out in seconds. All right then, his crystal ball shifted. The scene in the shrieking shack flickered into view. Peter Pettigrew in the center of an explosive confrontation. Sirius and Remus, faces red with tears, had Peter by the collar. His moth-eaten clothes tore as Sirius hauled him closer. Sirius leveled his wand at Peter's neck, but he did not fire. The anguish on his face was raw. Remus looked even more devastated. If anyone hurt, it was Remus, almost more than Peter. Peter had never measured up in courage, talent, or intellect. Remus had introduced him to the group out of a need for companionship. Remus, forever conscious of his werewolf stigma, wanted a friend who wasn't too brilliant. Peter had followed along because being near famous friends gave him a little reflected shine. But he'd been swept up into something far larger than he'd anticipated. Now Remus was tormented with guilt. If he hadn't brought Peter into the circle, perhaps James and Lily would still be alive. He bore that weight. Ted listened as Peter spoke, or recited. For a long time, he couldn't tell whether Peter had been rehearsing for the day of his capture, or whether his tearful confession under Imperius-style coercion was authentic. Sirius, Remus, I couldn't help myself back then. I've lived in torment all these years. I never dared become human again. I lived as a rat. I should have died then. Peter wailed. In desperation, Peter seized on a new tack. He halted the pleading and begged for death, clamping Sirius's hand and pushing the tip of the wand toward his own forehead as if to force it into his skull. Kill me! Kill me, Sirius! End my suffering. Let me apologize to James and Lily properly. I'm a coward. I'm too scared to face what I did. Kill me now. Disheveled, filthy, clothes hanging in rags, hair all bird's nest and eyes hollow, Peter looked utterly broken. Ted found the performance heartbreaking, and in a feverish aside to himself, absurdly theater grade, worthy, he thought, of film school analysis. Sirius finally crumpled. He was, after all, the romantic, unrestrained noble at heart. Coldness was not his nature. He lowered his wand. "Get out! Get away! Don't you ever show your face again. Our Peter Pettigrew died over 10 years ago. Get out of here!" For a moment, in the dusty old shack that had once been a shrine to their friendship, 3 men in their 40s stood weeping. Then, from beyond the door, came the sound of slow, mocking applause. "Clap, clap, clap, clap! What a wonderful performance! Crucio!" A voice that sounded delighted and cruel accompanied a dark green curse that slammed through the door and struck Peter Pettigrew full in the chest. "Ah!" Peter twitched violently and collapsed to the floor, bouncing like a live shrimp across the dusty planks. Crucio was a continuous curse. The green light remained attached to him. "Who?" Sirius fired a spell at the door, but the charm passed through the wood without so much as a sound. Crucio didn't even flinch. Lupin tried to shield Peter with a ward, but that failed too. 2 defenses, both useless. Whoever had arrived was terrifyingly powerful. The wooden door suddenly exploded, splinters flying into the room. Sirius and Lupin threw up quick shields. Only Peter on the floor was hit by a dozen or so shards. Compared to the mental torture of the Cruciatus, those wounds hardly registered. A figure drifted in like a specter, black robes billowing like storm clouds. Snape's eyes glowed with a fierce blue light. An intense surge of magic made him look like a walking bomb. Over the years, Snape had grown into his professorial power, and now that growth had tipped past rivalry into dominance. Anger and grief swept him, sharpening his resolve until it felt almost physical. In this state, even Dumbledore might have had to fight on equal terms. Compared to the desperate, wild energy of Sirius and Lupin, Snape was terrifyingly composed. Sirius sent 2 or 3 rapid, subtle spells at him, but Snape's cloak swelled and swallowed them. In that moment, he had the air of a new Dark Lord. Lupin saw Sirius's attempts were useless. Peter writhed and wailed beneath the Cruciatus. "Snape, Peter didn't mean to betray James and Lily," he blurted. Sirius roared, "For God's sake, stop the Cruciatus!" Hearing Lily's name seemed to crack the edge of Snape's trance. His eyes still shimmered with blue light, but his voice, when he spoke, was a hoarse rasp. "Unintentional?" He flicked his wand, and the green light on Peter jerked. Peter convulsed like a fish on a line. Kill me! Sirius, kill me! Lupin, kill me!" he shrieked. I'm so sorry, I was wrong, I'm sorry." Tears, snot, blood, Peter was reduced to a ruin. Crucio attacks the core of the spirit. Prolonged exposure can permanently damage the soul. He might as well be begging for death. Snape's voice, light and cold, cut through. "After Lily died, I investigated. This filthy rat defected to Lord Voldemort months earlier. At the time, apart from Voldemort, only Bellatrix knew. The 2 Prewett brothers died because of the information he betrayed. The Prewetts, members of the Order, Molly Weasley's brothers, had been killed by Death Eaters." Sirius's chest tightened. He grabbed Peter's wrist and rolled up his sleeve. A faint dark mark, skull and snake, was visible on the inner forearm. You. Sirius felt the world tilt. Heat roared in his ears. But Peter could not answer. His will had been broken for years, and the effects of a lifetime as a cowardly animagus had already shredded him. His soul was damaged. Only spasms and strange animal noises came out. Snape's face darkened. He had come for vengeance, and this was the man responsible for Lily's death. With a contemptuous flick, he moved without words, and Peter's neck split open with a wet, final sound. Blood sprayed across the room. It was a wandless, instantaneous sectum sempra. Snape stood in the doorway for a few seconds, looking down at them. Sirius and Lupin were numb. The day had already overwhelmed them. A friend long presumed dead had briefly returned, then revealed himself as a possible traitor, and now he had been killed before their eyes. Their old rival had exposed the truth and exacted judgment. Snape glared at them with loathing. In this war of life and death, their juvenile joking and carelessness had led to Lily's fate. Why would she have followed such fools? The memory seared him anew. Without meaning to, he raised his wand toward Sirius and Lupin. "Lily is dead. Why are you still alive?" Lupin stiffened, bracing for what might come. Then another voice called from beyond the doorway. "Ah, what a string of surprises. Professors, good afternoon." Ted had arrived. If he hadn't, things might have escalated to a bloody duel. Harry and the others are down in the labyrinth, Ted said. They're being besieged by a pack of creatures, but they're strong. Right now they're out of danger. The mention of Harry changed the mood instantly. The murderous tension dissipated. At that moment, the rest of the group was finally emerging from the underground maze. After dealing with the Dementor smoke, there had been no immediate threat, but the exit door stalled them. It was an old enchantment left by the house's previous owner, a century-old spell that was hard to break. Ted had planned to teleport everyone back rather than have them use the door, but Snape's sudden arrival had delayed him. Hermione had tried to dispel the door's magic for 5 or 6 minutes to no avail. Impatient, Harry struck it with his staff, and the door struck back, throwing him more than 3 meters. Angered, Hermione drew a dagger made from a basilisk fang and stabbed it into the panel. The magical barrier shrieked, the enchantments shattered and dispersed, and the wood split. Jerry stared at the long dagger. "Hermione, what kind of master key is that?" She rolled her eyes. "Ted made it. The dagger of universal charm breaking, basilisk fang." Ron brightened. "I knew it looked familiar." With the door broken, they rushed up into sunlight. Ron, supported by Neville and Jerry, had been ready to give his life to buy the others a chance. This was a narrow escape. As they emerged, they ran into Malfoy, who had come looking after noticing Harry had gone offline. He mocked Ron as usual. "If you can't control your mouth, your leg will suffer." And Ron, limping and furious, accused him of cursing him. Jerry scolded Ron to keep still. Malfoy only sneered on. Soon they rounded a corner and ran straight into Professor McGonagall. The 5 dust-covered figures and Ron's dangling leg left her stony-faced. "Excuse me, why is it that whenever trouble happens, you lot are always nearby?" she demanded. Ron mumbled, "I suspect their bad luck rubbed off on me." Everyone glared. Jerry teased, "Which year was your leg ever intact anyway?" McGonagall escorted them back to the castle, and the matter at the Shrieking Shack wound down. Sirius and Lupin chose to bury their old friend secretly and declare that Peter had died in battle. Ted helped Snape leave. Though at one point Snape had taken several spells head-on without flinching, that didn't mean he was unhurt. Magic had surged through him, numbing pain, but his leg had been injured, and more disturbingly, his face was vacant and his eyes empty. Even Ted could detect no clear thought behind them, as if Snape's mind had shorted out. The whole affair reopened old wounds for everyone, too painful to dwell on. There was an irony about the Shrieking Shack itself. Snape had once trailed the marauders there and nearly been killed by the werewolf Lupin. 20 years on, it had happened again. Perhaps some destinies were like rivers and wildfires. This place never treated him kindly. Ted teased him about it on the way out, half fortune-telling, half gallows humor. Thanks to reader Carefree Dello Immortal Churichian for the 500-point reward. Thank you. Chapter 294, Werewolf Improvement Experiment. Ted had just sent Snape back to his office. Snape had his own wolfsbane, so there was nothing more to do there, when a fire message from Sirius arrived. "Ted, we need you. Hurry, it's almost dark." For a moment, Ted's mind went blank. Then he remembered. Full moon. Had Lupin forgotten his potion? No, he was the most cautious of them all. But the wolfsbane had been shattered during the fight in the Shrieking Shack. After burying Peter Pettigrew and mourning briefly, Lupin had patted his pocket and cursed. There was nothing left. The sun was already setting. The moon would be up soon. Sirius had locked Lupin in the shack and sent for Ted, hoping that if Ted brought wolfsbane and moved fast, he might get Lupin to drink it before the change completed. If not, they would have to guard the shack, keep the neighbors away, and make sure Lupin couldn't get out. Ted didn't have a portkey left in the village, so he could only transfigure himself into a shadowy crow to slip out through the school gates, then apparate the rest of the way. He landed near the shack to find Sirius pacing, exhausted and filthy, looking 10 years older than he should. He sounded hollow when he spoke. "We can just hold him here." From inside the house came animal snarls and the sound of something tearing at wood. The golden full moon hung clear in the sky. "I'll deal with him," Ted said. He waved a hand and the reinforced door, barred and sealed, fell open. A huge hair-coated figure lurched out, all fangs and green glowing eyes. Before it could spring, Ted thrust out a palm. A puff of rank green smoke hit the creature's snout, and a stench rolled over the night. The werewolf howled in misery, dropped to its knees, clawing at its face and gagging until foam flecked its mouth. Ted's eyes went faintly white. He didn't cast an ordinary spell. Something like psionic energy slipped from him and into the beast's battered mind. That force gripped the wolfish part of the creature like an iron chain and dragged it into an invisible cage, locking it away. The werewolf collapsed, twitching, eyes slack and dull. Its tongue lolled on the dirt. Sirius stared. Wizards hated werewolves for good reason. After a full transformation, they were almost impossible to effect with normal magic, their resistance spiking. Yet Lupin had been felled by a single blast of foul air and a mind-binding. The stinking cloud was potent against anything with a keen nose. Sirius, whose animagus form made him especially sensitive, took a step back and covered his face, but the decisive factor was the mental lock. He hadn't seen Ted's eyes glow. He only knew the beast lay subdued. "Good," Ted said. "A sleeping werewolf can be managed." They carried Lupin back to the tobacconist's shop Ted had bought as a front. Ted immediately began collecting samples, hair, nails, blood, and even considered pulling a tooth before Sirius's dismayed look made him think better of it. "I've made progress in transfiguration," Ted said defensively under Sirius's stare. He proved it. In a single motion, he let his body dissipate into a curl of black smoke and reformed into a large black raven that circled the room once and returned. "An animagus?" Sirius blurted. He and his friends had only managed animagus work in their 5th year. The feat took years of practice. "No," Ted corrected, landing as himself again. "Not an animagus. It's another kind of transfiguration. That's what I've been working on." Sirius's eyes lit up. "You mean, if we change direction, if we make the werewolf change into a clean transfiguration instead of a corrupted one, could that stop the contagion?" Ted nodded. "I've long suspected that lycanthropy is an incomplete transfiguration, one that pollutes the person's own magic so that it triggers bestial change. If we can frame the transformation as a complete, controlled transfiguration, one that doesn't carry that corrupting element, we might prevent the infection and the loss of reason." If that's true, Sirius couldn't stop himself from standing and knocking over a teacup in his excitement. "We could eliminate the danger of the full moon completely." Ted outlined his theory, what he called the druidic model of shape change, and Sirius, who knew transfiguration well enough to judge plausibility, found it credible. There would be many obstacles, but at least they had a direction. This was more than a stopgap like Wolfsbane. It offered a real hope. They spent the night in the makeshift lab testing ideas. Exhausted by the day's grief and stress, Sirius eventually fell into a hard sleep after Ted dosed him with sleeping draughts, and Ted worked alone on Lupin. At dawn, he had a small crystal feel of a gray, swirling liquid, the residue of the curse itself. It was an odd kind of magic with its own insistence. When integrated, it polluted a wizard's magic and flared during the full moon, letting the bestial side take over. Wizards had extracted and studied fragments before, but never found a cure. Ted's plan was simple in its daring. If you can't eliminate the curse, subsume it. Use its structure as the basis for a complete, non-pathogenic transfiguration. For the next week, they threw themselves into the project. Sirius, when not at classes, joined discussions through the fire message system, sending updates through the hearth. Eventually, Ted asked Professor McGonagall to help. She was furious that her students were meddling in such dangerous work and made both boys feel very small and silly. Yet the theory was the kind of transfiguration problem a teacher of her stature couldn't ignore. If it worked, it would free magic from a long-standing horror. It would be a legacy to benefit generations. They made progress until they hit alchemy. The third round of potion-based trials stalled them. Ted's range of skill already astonished them. Transfiguration at a level McGonagall judged exceptional for his age, potions near mastery, and a surprisingly high alchemy aptitude. She muttered that even Dumbledore might not have raised anyone's alchemy that far by 14, perhaps save for Nicholas Flamel. The depth of Ted's competence in 3 fields at once had already shocked his professors. This alchemy bottleneck was the first problem that genuinely left him stuck. They all agreed on one thing. They needed Dumbledore's counsel. The last obstacle would be to get the headmaster to listen. 295. The Gears of Fate Start Turning. The Gears of Fate Start Turning. Chapter 291. The Gears of Fate begin to turn. Dumbledore lavishly praised Ted and his team's project on controllable werewolf transformations. He was particularly pleased that Ted was using his gifts to benefit the wizarding world. After Ted handed over some of his notes on Azeroth druid transformations, Dumbledore felt as if a skylight had opened in a ceiling that had already begun to give way. He might not be able to climb out yet, but at least he could see the horizon. He even put on his glasses and reread the notes carefully. The gears of fate, indeed, were beginning to turn. Ted had been so absorbed in researching werewolves, Lupin, more precisely, that he rarely dropped by the Ideal Land Game Project department. Fortunately, he had been a hands-off boss from the start, and the project team's little wizards were used to it. They didn't depend on him. The recent 1.23 competitive update was solid, and the few bugs that appeared had been handled cleanly. A few months of development and trial and error had helped many of the little wizards improve drastically. Those who had been weak in certain areas had caught up. Give little wizards something to do, and they'd either use it or lose it. These kids were making the most of it. Ted never dared admit that he'd designed the Underground Labyrinth adventure. He suspected the little wizards would kill him if he did. But that battle had taught them a great deal and sharpened their instincts. They threw themselves back into the adventure book, getting thrashed and learning from every defeat. Harry was studying methods for deploying a magic iron fist and magic cannon. Neville was trying to develop a guardian spirit system to supplement his golden fire sword. The blade couldn't attack on its own, so he needed auxiliary attacks. Swordplay was back on the agenda. Hermione had successfully developed several area of effect spells and tested them repeatedly in the adventure scenarios. Some were devastatingly effective, others hilariously unexpected. Jerry managed to replicate the Phantom spell and the mirror image Ted had shown him. The Phantom spell created insubstantial clones, mirror image produced physical duplicates, and Jerry's own invisibility made distinguishing the real target a nightmare for enemies. Ron, meanwhile, had broken his leg and been traumatized by the puppet spiders. He nearly wet himself and swore to get stronger. One robot couldn't handle every emergency, so he began designing his own mecha. He also developed a special magical coating that was waterproof, moisture-proof, insulating/resistant, and even had a chance to deflect spells. It turned out to be made from a prank syrup the Weasley twins supplied as raw material. Ted privately thought his team was a touch idealistic. As for Scabbers, Ron's missing pet, Ted promised to get him a replacement over the holidays. Ron was slowly accepting that the old rat wouldn't come back. A system notification chimed as Ted worked. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge. Triggered. Discovered. The birth of Zack, the secret weapon. The birth of Zack, the secret weapon blue. Logged the research data for the only accidental successful prototype of a Hextech bio-super soldier, the Zon Unstable Combatant, created in a Zon laboratory. Requires 440 experience to exchange. April's Otherworld knowledge was full of surprises. If the Werewolf Project hadn't been about Lupin, Ted might have been juggling two major projects at once. For now, he glanced over at Softy, who was still gorging on experimental waste, and felt content. Softy suddenly shivered, as if picking up a chill in the room. Many of the sensitive little wizards had noticed the same thing. Professor Lupin, the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, had been acting oddly for the past month. He'd shown no outward panic, but underneath his gentle, calm exterior, there was a persistent, barely contained excitement. Hermione and Harry had both noticed. Hermione through careful observation, Harry through stronger intuition and his familiarity with Lupin. Harry once asked Sirius, "Are you working on something interesting? Why is Lupin so excited?" Sirius, not wanting to say more, lied and said Remus might be falling in love. Harry, still a bit innocent about such things, could only respond with the kind of baffled curiosity that made Sirius sigh inwardly. Sirius wasn't entirely dishonest. Lupin's feelings were, in fact, stirring. In the first week of Ted's research, Sirius had quietly asked Ted, "Please help Remus at all costs." Lupin's life had been scarred by being a werewolf. Even though he was managing fairly well now, the psychological damage ran deep. He had trouble accepting love. Tonks's feelings for him had been obvious the previous summer, and he'd been avoiding her, pretending not to notice. Sirius was worried. Remus fretted not only about being a werewolf himself, but about the chance that the condition might be passed to children. That fear was normal. Magical traits, including curses, often had hereditary components. Ted could only promise what he could. No matter how far we go, I can guarantee the werewolf curse will not be inherited by the children, so rest easy. Even in the worst case, Ted believed he could eliminate the heritability of lycanthropy using a variation of the Witcher's grass potion. He had observed that potion's mutagenic effects while researching it earlier. When Snape received the formula, he looked utterly baffled, unable to trace where Ted had gotten the concept. Ted had said the words. How events unfolded after that was not entirely in his control. His assurance that their children would be safe quietly altered Remus's outlook. It changed Sirius's too. He began planning for a future that included children. Ted also found time to make a trip to the outskirts of London to retrieve a wand. He had been studying Peter through memories he could access when Peter had still been a rat. In one sequence, he watched Lord Voldemort kill the Longbottoms and then be rebound into death by Neville. At that time, Voldemort had only been accompanied by Peter, who had hidden. Peter had panicked, realized Voldemort was dead, and in the rush had grabbed Voldemort's U-wand and run. Later, when Bellatrix interrogated him, he dared not admit any of this. He claimed not to have been at the scene. But the U-wand with a phoenix feather core had ended up hidden with Peter. Ted decided it had to be recovered, and perhaps returned to Voldemort's hands later, because a future clash with Neville was not impossible. That twin wand could be Neville's trump card. Holding the U-wand in his hand, Ted felt the shadow of Voldemort drawing nearer. "It's time to start making arrangements for Senior Tom," he murmured. The most convenient way to influence Senior Tom would be through Ravenclaw's diadem. That object, or rather a Horcrux fashioned by Voldemort near his peak, lay in the storage room next to Ted's. The diadem carried an ugly, potent magic, and Ted had deliberately kept his distance from it. "I need to get a bottle of concentrated anti-magic water from Snape," he said to himself, planning his next move. Chapter 292, The Black Dragon That Devours Emotions and Ravenclaw's Diadem. Ted and Dumbledore stood at the entrance to Morgana's emotional vault, deep beneath the castle. Before them hung an enormous goblin-crafted silver sphere, 6 or 7 meters across, slowly turning inside a complex magic circle. It was a magnificent, almost terrible sight. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Dumbledore asked. Ted nodded. "You saw the experiment's results. It works." "We still don't know the side effects," Dumbledore said. "There's no other way," Ted replied with a shrug. "Everything has a price. We can't always be that careful. At worst, I stop using this magic. But if it succeeds, we solve a huge problem." Dumbledore regarded the rotating sphere for a long moment without speaking. Ted went on. "You've seen how the magic circle and the silver sphere have suffered damage over hundreds of years, yet the negative emotions haven't lessened. It might hold on another century or two, but we can't just leave this for future generations to figure out. By then, you'll be gone, and I'll still be here. If it works, my Patronus charm will be far stronger. If it fails, I'll lose one spell. But we'll have tried to fix something that's haunted this place for centuries." When Ted first modified the Patronus charm, he intended to use it against precisely this sort of thing. No single person could safely absorb the vault's accumulated malice. Human minds have limits. Massive pain and the tearing of dozens of consciousnesses would shatter a personality. So he borrowed from Eastern legends, the wrathful bodhisattva's destructive incarnations, figures who concentrate or transform negative forces. He built a Patronus that could do the same, the devouring evil dragon. Now he would set that Patronus loose on Morgana's collected emotions. For 3 days, Ted's friends hadn't seen him. Hermione fretted and asked McGonagall, who finally told her that Ted had gone to deal with something alongside Dumbledore. That soothed Hermione a little. 3 days later, Ted returned. The vault's problem, centuries old, had been resolved. The idea had worked. The only catch was that the Patronus charm was ferocious. If Ted ever died suddenly, the thing might become the most powerful, most vicious magical entity imaginable. he would have to control it carefully. Ted had already informed the 4 senior professors. They could breathe easier. The next task was Ravenclaw's diadem, which fit into Ted's larger plan. He had thought long and hard and decided to handle it with Dumbledore present. He could probably deal with it alone, but if he restored Ravenclaw's diadem, he intended to give it back to the school. It was the founder's legacy and should remain at Hogwarts, like Gryffindor's sword. Having already absorbed Ravenclaw's knowledge, it would be improper to keep the diadem itself. If it was to return to the school anyway, Dumbledore should be involved. So Ted, Dumbledore, Snape, McGonagall, and Flitwick gathered in the Room of Requirement's junk room. Ted had opened the door beforehand, but had not told the others about the room's existence. It was a student secret. Earlier, he had located the diadem with the miniature flying puppet bugs he'd made, tiny, rice grain-sized insects that could sense magic. The diadem was cunningly concealed. The first time he'd searched, he couldn't find it. It seemed to evade detection. Either Voldemort had bound a ward to it, or the Horcrux itself could hide from beings that were too powerful or too corruptible. On his second try, with a swarm of the little bugs, he combed through hundreds of magically reactive items and unearthed the hidden Ravenclaw diadem. Before the 5 professors, the object looked like a broken, filthy iron hoop. Professor Flitwick wiped his eyes. "Oh my! Look what they've done to that precious Ravenclaw diadem!" As Ravenclaw's head of house, Flitwick was heartbroken. To find that lost treasure would have been a triumph written into school history. Snape, looking on, frowned darkly. "Very malicious magic," he said, staring at the diadem and the ugly mannequin beneath it. Since the Shrieking Shack incident where he had killed Peter Pettigrew, he'd grown noticeably stronger. He'd even reached level 17, or so it seemed. He hadn't advanced in years. Perhaps his mindset had changed. Among those present, only Dumbledore might rival his mastery of the dark arts. If Snape called the magic malicious, it was truly dangerous. "We should move it," Dumbledore said. "This place is unsuitable. The junk here is too complex. There is a risk of unexpected accidents. Horcruxes are different from ordinary dark magic. They are subtle and adaptable. We must be cautious." Ted suggested, "Perhaps the Slytherin chamber?" McGonagall smiled. "Good idea." There was a certain dark humor to the thought of purifying Ravenclaw's diadem, defiled by the air of Slytherin, within the Slytherin's own chamber. Dumbledore even brought the sorting hat, ready to pluck out Gryffindor's sword if the diadem proved irredeemable. Over the next few days, the purification progressed. In the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore used an elaborate ancient ritual to bind the diadem and the mannequin inside a magic circle. At first, the diadem pretended to be a piece of junk, inert and filthy. But when Snape poured a concentrated anti-magic potion over it, the object reacted. It began to reach out telepathically, focusing on Snape, trying to tempt him. Ted watched closely and quietly probed Snape's mind to learn what the diadem was whispering. The Horcrux targeted Snape's deepest weakness, claiming it could restore the dead. Snape showed no outward sign of wavering. He tightened his occlumency and kept pouring the potion. He appeared entirely unaffected, but Ted knew better than to take appearances at face value. Snape was a master of legilimency and occlumency, skilled at crafting false memories and superficial thoughts. Even Voldemort had trouble reading him. In the corridor, Ted leaned close and murmured, "Professor, you wouldn't believe, right?" Snape stopped walking but did not turn. His voice, low and cutting, echoed back, "I know exactly what I face. There is no returning the dead. Only senile fools fantasize about that." With that, he flicked his robe and drifted away like a dark cloud. Ted shrugged and left the corridor. Dumbledore strolled out, fingers stroking the Elder Wand, murmuring to himself, "You're right. I often get lost in past fantasies. Perhaps I am already a senile fool." Ted had done well to avoid touching the diadem earlier. Whatever Voldemort had bound to it when he made the Horcrux was dangerous. The diadem's tricks were many. The sudden animation of the mannequin to attack, vicious curses, and most dangerously, subtle mental manipulation. Even Flitwick and McGonagall soon refused to approach the circle. They felt unprepared to deal with it. Ted and Snape, whose mental defenses were near impermeable, remained unaffected. More than a week passed, and, after a dozen different magical procedures, the Horcrux's layers were peeled back. Only now Dumbledore and the others faced the delicate question of how to break the underlying enchantment without irreparably damaging what was left of the diadem. "Ted, what have you been up to lately? Always so secretive," Harry demanded. "Neville's out in the Forbidden Forest farming every day, so it's understandable he can't join our group activities," Hermione added, hands on her hips. "But you, what have you been doing all the time?" My bad," Ted said, grinning. "In a few days I'll tell you. It's pretty exciting." "Oh, right, you're all here. Are you going to play Magic Alliance?" Jerry asked. Magic Alliance had started as a simple 5v5 game, but had since been renamed. At first, people wanted to call it Wizard Alliance, but someone pointed out that would exclude demi-humans and other magical species, hardly a unifying title, so it became Magic Alliance. Later, when the world reached true harmony, the plan was to rename it World Alliance. The newest patch had also added mid-lane brawl mode after players complained about last hitting and laning, but said they loved pure team fights. If Magic Alliance tested a wizard's overall combat abilities, mid-lane brawl tested adaptability and reaction in chaotic clashes. Over 80% of Gryffindor preferred brawl, direct and violent. Playing the full Magic Alliance could be frustrating thanks to Ravenclaw's sneaky plays or Slytherin's base-stealing tactics. Everyone looked at Ron. Jerry said, "Not Magic Alliance? You can't miss this. Let Ron tell you." "Oh," Ted looked at Ron. Ron puffed out his chest. "I think I've discovered Hufflepuff's legacy." "Ah!" Ted echoed. "To understand, you had to go back a few days." With 6 of them, forming a team should have been easy. But Ted had been busy lately, and Neville spent whole days with Professor Sprout in the Forbidden Forest sowing seeds. When the team was short-handed, Harry usually invited Malfoy in to make up the numbers. Magic Alliance required choosing 4 skills per match. You needed solid proficiency in each spell, and ideally skills that formed a system and complemented each other. You could pick all-out offensive spells, but those demanded a higher mastery. A powerful curse poorly cast might feel like nothing at all. Ted's skill set was Ice Ring, Mirror Image, Apparition, and Chain Lightning, Burst, and Assassin Play. He'd flash in with Ice Ring to control the field, create 3 mirror clones, the real one plus 3 1/3 power copies, and then unleash 4 Chain Lightnings together to guarantee at least 1 kill. Jerry ran Invisibility, Backstab, Clone, a passive triggered when hit or hitting, and a Flying Rogue Suit, Rocket Boots paired with a Gliding Cloak for fast movement. He specialized in hit-and-run tactics, strike, then be gone. Ron's kit was wild. High-temperature roasting, iron armor shield, mech transformation, and world-shattering impact. He fought in a mech. His ultimate temporarily replicated the first machine's overclocked charge mode for a wide-area blow, spectacular when it hit, infuriating when it missed. His mech transformation was complex, 2 sets of 7 abilities. Once, when cornered by a rolling rock summoned by an enemy, Ron extended his legs 2 meters and let the rock roll harmlessly under him. Jerry was dumbfounded. "How did you do that?" "Transformation technology, kid," Ron replied. Harry ran Magic Shot, Greased Souls, Transcendental Charm, and Magic Hand Seal. 3 of the 4 boosted stats or status. Greased Souls gave plus 3-5% movement, Transcendental Charm improved all attributes, and Magic Hand Seal conjured 2 3-meter-tall giant palms for close combat. He was a close-range bruiser with incredible sustain. Hermione's spells were Fire Raven Strike, Ice Shield, Blizzard, and Swarm of Ravens, area of effect firepower. Neville's abilities read like a gardener's dream. Sunflower, Spitting Mushroom, Evolvable, Chomping Cabbage, and Holy Sword mode. His plants grew reliably. Sunflowers healed teammates, Spitting Mushrooms evolved into Tower Guardians, Chompers multiplied and bit hard, and Holy Sword mode turned him deadly when needed. Malfoy favored Serpent's entrance, enemy repelling Jinx, Flying Broom, and Summon Norwegian Ridgeback Dragon, a summoner and escape artist. If he couldn't win, he fled, leaving venomous snakes behind. His little dragon, only about 4 meters long, was enough trouble for most players. They were all talented and had early access to Ideal Land, putting their skill systems at T0, but only Harry, Ron, and Jerry had logged huge hours. Harry often queued with Malfoy, so Ron and Jerry lost more than they liked. That night, Ron lost again and sneaked out to the kitchens, hoping for a late-night snack. What he found wasn't just food. It was a mechanism. When the group came to the kitchens and saw what Ron had discovered, Ted couldn't help but admire Hufflepuff's design. Apparently, only a long-term, persistent kitchen thief like Ron would notice the oddity. It reminded Ted of stories about someone uncovering a hidden technique only after endless repetition. These things reveal themselves to those who keep coming back. Ron hadn't thought much of it at first. He simply told Jerry. Jerry tried and couldn't work the mechanism. The Weasley twins tinkered for 3 days without success, but they all confirmed the mechanism came from Hufflepuff, a deliberate, clever legacy. At least it shows Hufflepuff valued magical proficiency, Ted said with a smile. It wasn't just about the love of food. Ted managed to unlock the magic barrier and led everyone into Hufflepuff's trial. A moment of disorientation, and they stood in a large, primitive village that felt like a memory Hufflepuff had left behind, herself enacting a test for future visitors. A short, stout woman stood before a stone table piled with pots, bowls, ladles, and other cooking tools. She smiled kindly. "Quite a few people have come," she said. Ted blinked. "Huh? You must satisfy my guests with your food if you want the treasures I left," she told them. "There are many rewards, so work hard." Then she paused, turned back, and added, "Even if you don't pass this time, you can come again. Satisfy just one guest and you'll receive a reward." With that, she vanished. The guests were an incredible assortment: centaurs, trolls, giants, goblins, Bigfoots and Yetis, water nymphs, dryads whose lower bodies were those of deer with vines wound around their torsos, even fierce female ghosts and crone-like hags. Where had Hufflepuff found so many friends? Ted later found a clue in Ravenclaw's diary. Hufflepuff cooked unbelievably well and had friends across the 5 lakes and 4 seas, across races and species. Her lesson was obvious. Peace is precious, and virtue wins hearts. "I'm good at winning people over with virtue," Ted declared, confident. After all, he'd learned cooking in another world. Despite his confidence and skillful work, he only managed to please 4 guests: a centaur, a troll, a giant, and a water nymph. For those successes, he received 3 magical food items and 1 enchanted seasoning, each with special effects when consumed. The nymph, however, hadn't been fully won. She looked at Ted with watery eyes, and Hermione stepped in front of him, glaring at the nymph protectively. Back at the castle, the group convened to plan. They needed to research each race's tastes and preferences. No matter how good the food, it wouldn't win anyone over if it didn't match their palate. Ron studied Ted thoughtfully as everyone talked. Maybe, he mused, they didn't have to rely only on delicious food to satisfy these guests after all. 298. Scarecrow's Fear Gas Recipe. Ted and his companions never expected that. Among Hufflepuff's many special guests, the hardest to please would be that old goblin. 6 attempts, 18 different dishes of all shapes and sizes. Not once did he say anything good. It felt like he was just there to mooch. Ted even half wished he could summon his Patronus, the black dragon, to swallow the old fellow whole. Ron, however, kept his composure. There has to be some special flavor that will satisfy him. We just haven't found it yet. Don't rush. Stay calm. With the dignity of true foodies, they stuck to honest cooking and refused to use tricks. If they'd slipped a love potion into the food, the goblin would have detected it immediately, and they'd have lost their chance at Hufflepuff's legacy. What surprised them most was what finally moved him. Kaka, the house elf's exclusive dish. Durian-stuffed, 9-turned intestines, an evolved version of what Professor Lockhart once ate. After one taste, the old goblin wept and at long last managed a good. Kaka simply announced, "I added onions," and the room erupted. Ted suspected the poor goblin had been coaxed into it, terrified of having to eat a second helping. When the guests vanished into green smoke and the memory illusion faded, all that remained was a large, steaming iron cauldron. It wasn't an ordinary pot, it was a magical relic. Hufflepuff's letter explained her legacy. A golden cup that, when filled with water, can produce your favorite drink and soothe emotional wounds. The cup Lord Voldemort had once coveted, and which later became a Horcrux, hidden in Bellatrix's vault. And the cauldron before them. Feed it the right ingredients, and it will produce a finished delicacy that heals physical injuries. Each founder, it turned out, left 2 treasures. Gryffindor left the sword and the diary. The sword slays enemies and protects the school. The diary trains successors. Ravenclaw left the diadem and the eagle ring, the ring on the Ravenclaw common room door, which records knowledge and has evolved over 1,000 years. The diadem enhances intelligence, the ring grants knowledge. Hufflepuff left the golden cup and the cauldron, one mends the heart, the other the body. Slytherin left the locket and the wand, their functions remained unclear. The serpent staff from America's Ilvermorny, by the way, had somehow become a great tree. Finding Hufflepuff's relics meant they had to tell the headmaster and the professors. The cauldron belonged to everyone. Everyone could cook and eat together. That, Hufflepuff's trial had shown, was the lesson she wanted to pass on. Mutual help and unity. It would have been impossible for a single person to get through all those odd taste trials alone. With the cauldron in the kitchens, the house elves' repertoire and skill shot up. The kitchens now had skylights and plenty of greenery, giving the feeling of cooking out in the open wild. Watching the cooking itself was uplifting. House elves beamed with pride, and many Hufflepuff students, dreaming of careers in magical cuisine, came to help. Thanks to the cauldron, the little wizards had a delicious, healing Easter. As usual, Ted sang at the festival, performing Young for You. San di sigamingwanizai my ga, tuyo ipamen woye posen lai gasida. Even with his strong suburban Beijing accent, the passion was infectious. Little wizards tossed off their robes and waved them like propellers, howling and cheering. Ted completed a festival task and received an item card. Festival Petals, a toy that showers nearby targets in fluttering petals. Meanwhile, the problem of Ravenclaw's diadem had reached its final stage. A delicate step that required Dumbledore himself. He couldn't use force to preserve that relic, so he was up on the rooftop, painstakingly working through the dark arts. There wouldn't be a resolution anytime soon. With S-rank tournament preparations and the ideal land update finished before the holidays, the project team no longer needed Ted. He finally had time to return to his own experiments, the biomechanical slime, Softy. May arrived quietly, and a talent trigger popped up. Ding! Talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered. Discovered, Scarecrow's fear toxin formula, green. Scarecrow's fear toxin formula recorded the neuro-fear toxin used by Gotham's Scarecrow. It required 190 experience to redeem. It might not be crucial, but it was cheap to unlock. Ted could easily earn 400 experience a day through Ideal Land. With a bit more grinding, he could push to 600. Experience wasn't the problem. How to use it efficiently was. A more pressing issue was the coming holiday. Ideal Land's network coverage was tiny, barely the school and Hogsmeade. They might add one temporary node at Secondhand Home, but it would still mean a sharp drop in holiday experience gain. Ted groaned at the thought of going from luxury back to frugality. Softy, meanwhile, was progressing nicely. Originally a shape-shifting slime, the biomechanical upgrades had strengthened those abilities. It could stretch to dozens of times its length and snap back like a giant rubber band, temporarily form a sofa for Ted to nap on, and had absurd durability. With a volume of a dozen cubic meters, it would take hours to dent it. It felt no pain, and it had climbed to 4th-level magic resistance. Spells like Defindo and the bone-breaking curse only nicked its surface and healed within seconds. Even fire and ice had trouble. Unless the caster's output was huge, damage healed faster than Softy could be slowed. Ted praised it. "Softy, keep it up. I believe in you." Softy replied bluntly, "Believe in what? You're using me as a sofa. Do you believe I'll be a bed later?" Ted suspected Zahn's failure had come from the researchers being eliminated and their work turning on them. Softy, however, was showing real promise. Unlike Rat Brother, Cabbage, and Chicken Bro, which had stagnated, Softy's stats were visibly improving, despite its daily diet of dirt and scraps. After unlocking the Scarecrow formula, Ted began researching applications. The fear toxin had been devastating even to Batman. As a chemical agent, it would be blunted by a bubblehead charm, so it wouldn't be much use against wizards. Ted's plan was to integrate the toxin into a new kind of Dementor smoke, or find a way for it to penetrate skin and pores to bypass protective charms. As his thoughts drifted into darker, more experimental territory, he laughed at how far from traditional wizardry his work had strayed. The rank ladder was entering its final stretch. After the final exams would come the one-on-one king tournament, to decide the strongest of the little wizards, and another crucial test awaited Ron, the Quidditch trials. Lately, Ron had been thinking of quitting. He'd once loved Quidditch because it let him show off, but now he'd found something he truly loved: mechs. 60% of his free time went to designing and building mechs. The rest he split between eating and gaming. With the Weasley twins heading into their 6th year and nearing retirement, Gryffindor's house team could be in trouble next year. A 3-millisecond moment of silence for the old cat lady. All right, that's it. Thanks to fellow reader Xiaoyao Daluo Immortal Chu Richin for the 1,000-point reward. Thanks to fellow reader Moni Mei Shangliang for the 100-point reward. 299. Dragon Eggs Hatch. Lupin resigns. Ron had been so absorbed lately that he seemed to forget to eat and sleep. According to Jerry, Ron was doing incomprehensible research and experiments day and night, filling an entire notebook in a week. The wastebasket was piled high with discarded papers every day. Strange. Too strange, Jerry complained. Either Ron got bewitched by some weird diary again, or he's hit puberty. Despite Jerry's teasing, Ron really was lost in research. He had actually invented a new kind of magical metal. When Ted received the tiny fingernail-sized shard, its shape oddly organic, he could hardly believe it. "You say you've made a magical superconductor?" Ted asked, incredulous. Any energy transmission through a medium incurs losses. The more loss, the more insulating it is. The less loss, the better. If you transmit 100 points of magic and only 30 arrive, even the highest officials in the Celestial Empire wouldn't be that exploitative. What, is this the Red Lion Society? Magic transmission loss mattered. It was why Ron had struggled to power the 7-meter-tall first machine in battle using only one person's magic, even with auxiliary sources. Ron was rich in magic by nature. Weasleys were descendants of ancient Celts with a magical lineage stretching back millennia, and his talent wasn't worse than Harry's or Neville's. But still, it seemed insufficient. With mechanical design already optimized, the only avenue left was materials. Ted didn't want to hurt his friend's feelings, so he didn't show disbelief. He tested the new metal in the machine, and it worked. Sort of. It wasn't the absolute superconductivity Ron claimed, but its magic conductivity matched and even slightly exceeded Goblin-made magic silver in some tests. "Where did you get the formula?" Ted asked. Ron scratched his red hair and reddened. "I dreamed it." If anyone else had said that, Ted would have suspected a lie. But Ron's thoughts were as transparent as glass. He wasn't lying. The strange alloy, derived through 7 or 8 simple substitutions, really was an excellent magical conductor. Dreams had inspired real discoveries before, Mendeleev and the periodic table for one, so it wasn't impossible. Still, the results were inconsistent. Ted repeated the process 10 times and only managed 3 successes. The best larger sample weighed 3.58 kilograms and showed a superconductivity rate of 76.87%. The highest superconductivity percentage recorded was 83.46%, but that sample was only the size of a fingertip. Ted examined the data and said, "It's valuable, but it's not true superconductivity yet. It points the way. Maybe the preparation is too sensitive to minor variables." "Ron, you mean it's conductive but not fully superconducting?" "Exactly," Ted said. They were dealing with magic. Subjective factors, mood, intent, could change outcomes even when the process appeared identical. If mundane materials science couldn't get room temperature superconductivity, maybe magic could help. In any case, Ron's discovery was already a big deal. Replacing critical components with the new alloy boosted the first machine's magic utilization by 14.58%. That was just the start. More production and broader replacement could improve it further. One night, while Ted was still experimenting with the material, a strange feeling swelled in him. He looked up. Next door was the Dragon Egg incubation room. Had the long period of looting Hogwarts at last paid off and produced hatchlings? He put down his tools and hurried over. The magic lines drawn on the floor, walls, and ceiling glowed. The ritual materials had turned to ash. The dragon egg in the center trembled, tiny cracking sounds, kaka-kaka, issuing from the shell. A small, pointed, hard snout poked through. The Azeroth red dragon egg had hatched. Ted's frantic calls on the two-way mirror woke Hermione, Harry, Neville, and the others. "Quick! Come quick! You have to see this!" They tumbled to the secret base in their pajamas and found a hatchling breaking free on the table. A dragon! Ron's eyes went wide. He'd been bitten by a dragon before. The memory made the sight vivid. Ted had mentioned incubating dragon eggs at the start of the year, but so much time had passed that they'd all forgotten. And now, suddenly, it had hatched. Harry watched the red hatchling crawling and muttered, "If Draco saw this, he'd be so excited he'd faint." Draco Malfoy was a serious dragon enthusiast. His family could afford peacocks and the like, but not a dragon. Most of his passion had to be indulged in other ways. Ted picked the small creature up. It could barely crawl yet. It's a little girl. From now on, you'll be called Anna Epiphany. Anna's birth thrilled Ted and his friends for days. She grew remarkably fast, mentally as well as physically. Within a few days, she learned that Anna was her name and recognized each member of Ted's group. She could already flutter around the room. Ted wanted Anna to appear in public eventually, so he and the twins worked on a realistic figurine, a doll that could interact, speak, and move like a real creature. Ted applied his early research on simulated souls to the prototype to collect behavioral data. When the twins released a sample, many younger wizards were ecstatic. Who wouldn't want a pet that didn't need feeding or cleaning up after? The figurine was set to be sold alongside Ted's LAN hotspot two-way mirror before the holidays. The two-way mirror could consume a user's magic to create a temporary Ideal LAN network hotspot, letting young wizards play together over the Ideal LAN network during the break. Experience must not be wasted, Ted declared. Of course, it wouldn't be cheap. Factory price was 3 galleons and 8 sickles. I really didn't make any money, Ted protested, half joking. June was almost here. Finals were scheduled for early June, then the holidays. Ted found Lupin packing his bags. Looks like I don't need to remind you, Ted said with a smile. It's a pity I couldn't stay the whole semester, Lupin replied, smiling back. I've prepared the final exams, though. With the term ending, Lupin had to go. The political climate had shifted after Peter's death. Snape, who had been his enemy, seemed to have broadened his perspective and didn't publicly expose Lupin's condition as a werewolf to force him out. Still, Lupin couldn't stay. The curse was growing stronger. The success of the transformation suppression was incomplete, mainly because Dumbledore's efforts had been focused on the Ravenclaw diadem Horcrux. They hoped there would be better progress next semester. Lupin's mindset had stabilized, and his relationship with Tonks had deepened. At least he'd taken a pair of two-way mirrors with him, which suggested his ties to friends were intact. Lupin had been important to many of the younger wizards this year. He'd taught them defense against the dark arts and also offered guidance about life. He told Neville that kindness mattered far more than brilliance. Neville admitted, Remus is the best teacher I've ever had. Now it was time to say goodbye. But the farewell wouldn't be forever. At the gates of Hogwarts, Remus Lupin stood with his suitcase, turning back to look at the crowd who had come to see him off. Ted and his friends were at the front. Behind them stood first years through sixth years, nearly 200 students in all. Even many Slytherins had come. Faces were solemn, eyes were red with unshed tears. To the younger students, Lupin had been the gentle defense against the dark arts professor who made lessons interesting and always seemed to end too soon. To the older ones, he had been a wise guide, explaining difficult ideas and offering real advice about life after Hogwarts. His impromptu cram sessions had helped fifth years raise their OWL marks, and many sixth years left with a clearer idea of their future. Even those who had resisted him at first had come to respect his quiet competence and steady presence. Now this rare, steady mentor was leaving, and everyone felt it. Students, Lupin began, his voice rougher than he intended. The silence that followed made him hesitate. He lifted his chin, forcing a smile and swallowing the tears. If he cried now, it would be awkward for a professor. This is not goodbye forever. We'll meet again. Go back now and take care of yourselves. Professor Lupin, goodbye, Ted said. Professor Lupin, goodbye, the others echoed. Professor Lupin, goodbye. The students shouted together, their voices carrying across the grounds. From a distant tower, other professors and Dumbledore watched. Very touching, isn't it? Dumbledore said softly. Professor McGonagall dabbed at her eye and smiled. Remus made his year count. He was a good teacher and a good colleague. Snape's mouth twitched in something like a sneer, but his mind wandered. If I resigned, would anyone see me off? If I died, would anyone attend my funeral? There would be a funeral, wouldn't there? Lupin turned and waved again and again until the school gate rounded out of sight. Only then did he pull a handkerchief from his sleeve, wipe his face vigorously, draw his wand, and apparate. Goodbye, my students. Goodbye, my alma mater, he must have been thinking as he vanished. On the last day of May, Lupin resigned and left Hogwarts. The students were sad for a while and speculated who would teach Defense Against the Dark Arts next year. At least Lupin's year had restored faith that the job wouldn't always go to oddities like Quirrell or Lockhart. A little later, Ted was alone in the secret base when a notification chimed. Ding, talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered, found, a brief discussion on dragon-slaying magic. A brief discussion on dragon-slaying magic. Contained notes and theories from ancient dragon-slaying mages. Their method, use enchantments to bind dragon power to a human, granting them the strength to fight dragons. The catch was brutal. Attaching dragon power damages the human semicircular canals, causing severe motion sickness, and prolonged use gradually transformed the user into a dragon. The text could be acquired for 888 experience. Holy crap, red quality, Ted shouted. He hadn't seen a red quality find in ages. Dragon-slaying magic sounded incredibly powerful. Maybe it came from some other world. He wasn't familiar with all of it, but the promise of human-level dragon power was irresistible. 888 experience was steep, but it was worth it. Ted started reading immediately. The technique was dangerous but fixable. He thought of ways to solve both major side effects. Damage to the semicircular canals could be healed with psychic transfiguration or by restoring the structures after each use. Permanent transformation into a dragon? That, Ted decided, was also a problem transfiguration could handle. If his druid transfiguration could incorporate the draconic form into a controlled transformation, then what the old text called a side effect could become an ability he could switch on and off. Am I a genius or what? He grinned, already sketching ideas. Nearby, Softy shivered, and the magical refuse in their corner looked decidedly unappetizing. Every time something explosive like this turned up, Softy ended up stuck with the fallout. The little dragon hatchling Anna, chewing a giant teething stick, glanced around nervously. She didn't know what dragon power meant, but she felt uneasy. Something big and dangerous had just been mentioned. Ted planned to keep studying, but exams intervened. Tests were never a problem for him. He flew through papers and was always among the first to hand them in, which drove Hermione mad. She liked competing and measuring her scores against his. Ted, unconcerned, would scribble, finish, and go back to whatever research preoccupied him. How boring, Hermione thought. On the morning of June 6th, the divination exam finished earlier than expected. Most of the students gathered their things and left, carefree. But then Professor Trelawney grabbed Neville's arm with an iron grip. Her eyes went blank, her voice hollow. Death descends upon darkness, and darkness shall rise again. The servant shall break free from his chains and reunite with his master. The Dark Lord shall return, stronger and more terrible than before. Her trance broke. Trelawney blinked, looking at the stunned students. What's wrong? Did something happen? If you want me to change your grades, that's not possible. It's all fate's arrangement, she said with an oddly pleased smile. No, Jerry cried. Professor, you made a prophecy. Ron's face went pale, his mouth stretched as if he might burst into tears. Ted's classmates had long ago learned a crucial feature of Trelawney's gift. Her prophecies spoken while in a trance and with no memory afterward were almost always accurate. So what did this mean? Trelawney was stunned, and then elated. She dug a crystal ball from her sleeve. Since the strange guidance she'd received from Ted, some of her divinations had become more reliable. She had gained a sliver of confidence in her talent. And the fact that she couldn't remember the trance? Easy. Record it with a crystal ball. She listened back to the prophecy, and her color drained. I knew it, she said fearfully. A prophecy never means anything good. Call Dumbledore. Call Ted. Quickly. But Ted wasn't anywhere nearby. He had handed in his exam early and gone back to his studies on dragon-slaying magic. While most of the students were now focused on the S1 Ideal Land Tournament and the Hogwarts Quidditch Finals, Registration closed that night, and the matchups would be announced the next morning. Ted and his friends were suddenly pulled into something far stranger and darker. The prophecy gave only a few concrete clues. The Dark Lord seemed a clear reference to Voldemort, surely not Grindelwald, and the line about return suggested resurrection. But what did death descends upon darkness mean? Had Voldemort's remnant soul been killed before and might be killed again? Who was the servant? Peter Pettigrew was dead. Voldemort's wand, its you, was in Ted's hands already. The questions multiplied. The other students, however, had tournaments and finals to worry about. The S1 tournament was already in full swing. Excitement pulsed through the school even beneath the sudden, cold shadow of an old, terrible prophecy.